The ceremony begins as someone calls out Joanna Marlin's name while she keeps her eyes shut and prays. A voice formally announces that in the name of God, they have something to declare, as a woman holds Joanna's hands and asks if she's ready. She reminds the girl that every skill is a gift from above and that the type of skill doesn't really matter. Joanna looks up with high hopes, waiting for the moment the voice finally mentions the specific power being handed down to her. It's supposed to be exactly what she needs to succeed. Joanna stands alone in the massive church hall while the legendary gift finally appears. It's just a screen labeled Login Bonus. Later on, a guy sits across from Joanna and starts things off with a heavy apology before dropping the bomb that he wants to break off their engagement entirely. Joanna's younger sister looks away and says she's sorry too, leaving everyone in the room feeling completely awkward. Joanna stands there looking completely stressed out as the situation gets worse. Caroline starts tearing up and confesses that she's actually fallen in love with Lord Philip. Hearing her sister cry makes Joanna feel like she's the one who should be losing it, thinking about how insane it is to have to deal with something like this, right before her wedding was supposed to happen. Suddenly, things flash back 5 years, to a time when Caroline was yelling at their mother about how she'd never marry a guy like Philip. The whole family is sitting around for tea when the mother asks Caroline how she could even say that, since she thinks Philip is a wonderful man, but Caroline isn't having any of it. She makes it clear she only wants to marry someone who looks like a handsome prince, leaving Joanna looking at Philip and wondering if his looks are really that much of a deal-breaker. Joanna admits that even though Philip is a bit chubby, he's honestly the kindest and most gentle person she's ever met. She explains how he's a distant relative who became the family heir, and she ended up taking the marriage deal Caroline didn't want. Once that was settled, Joanna headed off to the academy in the capital, but they stayed close by writing letters back and forth while she was away. Whenever she came home for the long school holidays, they'd sit together and talk for hours about everything going on at the estate. Joanna really loved their time together, thinking about how all the stories Philip told her were always so exciting and fun to listen to. But even with all that history, she has to face the guy who just dumped her. Philip stands there and greets her, saying it's been a while since they last saw each other. He follows up by asking if she's been doing well lately, but Joanna just looks at him wondering to herself exactly when the vibe between them started to shift. She remembers how Philip stopped being real with her and only made boring small talk, and then one day she checks her mail at school and there's absolutely nothing waiting for her. She stands in front of the mailboxes and just sighs. The letters totally stopped coming. Everything starts clicking for her, and she realizes that the thing between Philip and Caroline definitely didn't just happen overnight. She looks down and says she understands the situation. Sitting across from the new couple, Joanna asks if her father knows what's going on, and Philip confirms the news, telling her he already spoke to her father about everything. Philip mentions that he already got her father's blessing for the match, while Caroline just stands there looking completely ashamed of herself. He keeps going, explaining that the wedding they had on the books for next month is still happening exactly as planned, except now the ceremony is for him and Caroline. Joanna just stares at them, her heart is clearly breaking. She realizes she was the only person involved who had no idea what was happening behind her back. She quietly says she gets it, looking at Caroline, who still can't even bring herself to look Joanna in the eye. Caroline finally whispers an apology to her sister, but Joanna just gives a cold, short reply that she understands. Joanna points out that if her father has already agreed to all of this and things have already reached a point where there's no turning back, then she clenches her dress tightly and tells them she'll just follow her father's orders like she's supposed to. She decides she's had enough of this talk, telling them, well then, and asking to be excused as she stands up to leave the room. Philip calls out to Joanna as she leaves, but she doesn't even turn around, she just keeps walking, feeling a mix of pure frustration and deep sadness over everything that just went down. Out in the hallway, one of the maids spots her and tries to check in, asking if she's all right, but Joanna just keeps her eyes down and says she's exhausted. She just wants to go lie down for a while. She puts on a weak smile and asks the maid to just leave her alone for the rest of the day, then slams her bedroom door shut, standing there in the dark wondering why any of this is happening to her. She collapses onto her bed, completely heartbroken, asking herself why she wasn't good enough to be kept around. Tears start blurring her vision as she admits to herself that deep down, she saw this coming. As she lies there, that strange glowing screen pops up right in front of her face. It's her login skill. She looks at the screen and realizes this useless power is the reason her whole life just fell apart. In this country, every kid gets a special power called a skill on their 15th birthday. And since these abilities are different for everyone, they vary a lot from person to person. The Marlin family has always been known for producing amazing water magic users for generations. So Joanna's engagement to Lord Philip only happened because he was a water magic user as well. That's just how much the people of the Marlin family really value and take pride in their water magic. It's their whole world, but on that specific day, things went sideways. The skill Joanna got was something called login bonus. She looks at the screen, thinking about how it's just a transparent board she doesn't even know how to use. Joanna stays collapsed on her bed, feeling totally stuck and alone, while she tells herself it's just too frustrating. She doesn't want anyone to see how much this is actually hurting her. Joanna stays in bed crying, thinking that trying to act normal right now is just impossible. The night drags on as the crescent moon sits high in the dark sky. She finally falls asleep, but a loud growl from her stomach wakes her up. Joanna opens her eyes and groans, feeling totally exhausted after everything. She sits up in the dark and realizes she's actually starving, so she sneaks out of her room, carefully peeking around the door to check the hallway. She tells herself that she probably won't run into anyone at this time of night, plus, she really doesn't want anyone seeing her face looking this messy from crying. Joanna makes it to the kitchen thinking there has to be some food left over, and she starts grabbing some bread, cheese, and fruit to fill her basket. Joanna finishes packing her snacks and thinks that this should be enough to last her, so she starts heading back, hoping she can make it to her room without bumping into anyone. But then she stops when she hears someone saying there won't be any problems if she's the one who marries into the Linhan family instead of her sister Caroline. Joanna freezes. She realizes she's listening to her father and stepmother having a secret meeting. And she listens as her father mentions that Caroline absolutely hates the idea of being sent away to the Linhans. Her stepmother agrees, saying it would be a real shame to force Caroline into a marriage like that. But the father points out that they can't just say no to an engagement proposal that comes directly from the royal family, though he knows Philip and Caroline are actually in love, which makes the stepmother chime in that Caroline is way too valuable to lose anyway since she can use water magic. The stepmother doesn't hold back, saying it's pretty obvious which one of the sisters is actually the right fit to take over the Marlin family's legacy, and it isn't Joanna. Her father agrees, bringing up that Joanna is basically a lost cause because her new skill is totally useless compared to what her sister can do. Joanna stands frozen in the hallway. She heard every word of them trashing her. A tear runs down her face as she repeats the words useless skill to herself, and she can't take it, so she turns and runs off before they see her. She finally makes it to a quiet room and just collapses onto the sofa, but the pain doesn't stop. She starts wondering if her dad has always looked down on her like this, eventually just burying her face and letting the tears fall. Joanna sits by herself and tries to focus on eating something, just trying to distract herself from everything that happened, but the tears just keep coming anyway. She lets out a quiet sob, holding her hand over her mouth as she completely loses it. She thinks to herself that everything is happening just because of this skill. Her whole life is getting ruined by this login bonus thing. Looking back, the skill she was given that day ended up being a huge deal because it was an unknown power that even the National Research Institute had no record of. One of the researchers asked her what the effects were, and if there was any danger involved in using it, bringing in a whole team of experts to look into her while she was being investigated. During the tests, the lead researcher pointed out how no one else could see the status board she was looking at. Joanna reaches out and taps the floating login button that only she can see, starting up the weird screen that pops up once every day. This mysterious board was something that nobody else could see or touch, making it hers and hers alone. She tried everything to get a reaction out of it, like reading the words out loud or just chanting the commands in her head, but nothing ever seemed to change. Even when she yelled about using a ticket in front of the experts, the researchers stayed completely stumped. Eventually, they just gave up on the whole investigation because by the time she hit her 500th day logging in, they still knew absolutely nothing. The lead researcher sits the family down and admits they did their best to test it, but the only thing they could actually prove was that the skill wasn't a threat to anyone. Joanna's father just nods and says he gets it, basically washing his hands of the whole thing. Joanna stands by the window, starting to put the pieces together as she thinks back, realizing that Philip started acting totally different and growing cold toward her right around the same time the official investigation into her login skill finally ended. It turns out that in the end, her father and her fiancé were exactly the same, only ever caring about her for her power. She looks out at the moon, wondering what her real mother would even say about all this, and starts remembering the things her mom told her back before she passed away. She used to say that since they lived such fancy, luxurious lives, they had to give something back in return. Her mother would hold her hands and explain that being a noble meant carrying duties that most people don't. Joanna just stares off, thinking about that noble duty and how much it's costing her right now. Joanna stares off, thinking about how this whole engagement was a royal request, so it's not like she can just say no. She tells herself that for the sake of the family name, she has to accept it, no matter who her fiancé ends up being. With her mind finally made up, she clenches her fist because sitting around and worrying isn't going to fix anything. She stands up and prepares to move on, knowing she just has to face whatever comes next. It's time to handle her business, so the scene shifts outside to the Marland estate, looking as quiet as ever while Joanna heads over to see her father. She slowly opens the door to his office and finds him waiting for her at his desk. He looks her over and mentions she's doing better than he expected after everything that went down. Joanna just keeps her head down, saying yes and apologizing for all the mess. Her father tells her to drop it, saying he was actually just as shocked by those two. Joanna looks down and thanks her father for understanding the situation with her sister and Philip, but her father stops her, saying it's pretty bad timing to bring this up after everything that just happened. He gets straight to the point and tells her a new engagement proposal just came in from the royal family specifically for her. He notes the royals technically said they could turn the offer down, but then he admits that as the head of the Marland family, there's no way he can actually refuse. He looks at her while holding the document, telling her he needs her to understand why this has to happen. Joanna looks like she's about to cry, but she just asks who the guy is, and her father explains it's Lord Vincent, the oldest son of Margrave Linhan. He also mentions the guy is 21, which makes Joanna quietly process the news. She can't believe it's for her, but her father isn't done talking yet. Joanna's father starts off by saying she might already know this, but he explains that Lord Vincent actually has a lot of trouble moving his body because of some bad injuries, which he apparently got from a monster about 2 years ago. He looks at her and asks if she understands what he's telling her, and Joanna looks down and tells him she gets it. The father explains that they'll follow tradition and have the wedding after a year of being engaged, so Joanna will have to go live in Linhan until the actual date comes around. He tells her to get ready since Linhan is sending someone to pick her up soon, and Joanna just says she understands, but as her father keeps writing, he starts to bring up another point. Joanna looks like she's on the verge of tears and asks him what's going to happen with Caroline's wedding now. Joanna is caught off guard by the news, looking completely shocked and pretty stressed out as she looks down and tries to process everything, her face showing how much this is weighing on her. Her father explains that everything is going to happen right after she makes the move to Linhan, and he mentions that it's probably going to be too hard for her to attend the other wedding. Joanna just nods and says she understands, but deep down, she knows this whole arrangement is honestly just more convenient for him anyway. The father doesn't seem to notice her mood and starts telling her to make sure that she is fully prepared and ready to go by the day of her departure. Joanna lets out a long, heavy sigh as she stands there feeling totally abandoned by her family. Later, she sits all alone on a big couch in the empty room, thinking about how he didn't even give her a hug, and she just slumps over the side of the sofa looking completely drained, like there's still more on her mind. Joanna thinks about how even after everything that's happened, people are still keeping secrets from her. She remembers hearing some pretty dark rumors about her new fiancé back when she was still at the academy. The story goes that Lord Vincent got hit with some nasty poison from a wound he got fighting a monster, and now he can't even move his body right. But that isn't even the worst part of the situation. Apparently, he used to be a really good-looking guy, but the poison messed up his face and parts of his body, turning them a strange color and making him look like a total nightmare to anyone watching. Things got so bad that his former fiancée, a girl named Lady Priscilla, supposedly passed out on the spot the very first time she saw what had happened to him. Joanna realizes this is just a political deal, so she wasn't going to be picky about his looks anyway, but it still stings that her own father didn't even care enough to tell her the truth himself. Joanna stands there for a second, just trying to process everything. She looks at the small pile of bags she's managed to pack and wonders if that's actually going to be enough. She realizes pretty quickly that she can't take too much with her anyway, so she figures she might as well give the rest of her stuff to the servants or just let them sell it all off. Joanna finally takes a seat in her armchair and lets out a huge sigh, feeling the weight of the move. She looks around the room one last time, feeling more than a little bit lonely. Looking at an old photo of her family, she reminds herself she has to be out of here by tomorrow. But then a knock at the door breaks her train of thought, and she tells whoever it is to come on in. It turns out to be an old maid named Claire, and Joanna is genuinely surprised to see her standing there. Claire tells her she just wanted to say goodbye before the big move, and Joanna walks over to greet her. Joanna smiles at Claire, telling her how happy she is to see her, but Claire looks back with an emotional face, saying she's just so she can't even finish the sentence before she starts tearing up. Claire tells Joanna that she's known her since the day she was born, and seeing how much she's grown into a beautiful woman makes her proud. Joanna realizes that Claire was the only one who really cared for her after her mom died. Claire laughs a bit, bringing up how Joanna was such a tomboy back then, always getting in trouble and being scolded by Lady Vivian. But that's over because she says Joanna has finally become a respectable and fine young lady. Joanna just smiles to herself and agrees that she definitely was a wild kid. Joanna thinks back to when she was a wild kid, catching bugs and showing them to Lady Vivian just to get a reaction. But Claire's voice breaks the mood, mentioning how she always dreamed of seeing Joanna in a wedding dress. Claire stares out the window, sounding pretty down as she talks about how far away the Linhan place is, and Joanna can't help but agree, looking a bit depressed herself as she realizes the distance. She looks over at the woman who raised her and says she's got one last favor to ask before she heads out. Before she can even say it, Claire pulls her into a tight, warm hug that says everything, leaving Joanna crying happy tears as she thanks her for everything she's done over the years. Claire just looks at her with that kind, motherly smile, clearly trying to keep it together while she tells Joanna that she's heard nothing but good things about the Linhan family being loving people. She holds her hands tight, promising her that they're definitely going to cherish her when she arrives. Claire grips Joanna's hands one last time, telling her to take care and that she really wants her to be happy. Her father stands there with the rest of the family, just giving her a cold goodbye and telling her to look after herself. Joanna gives him a small smile and says she will, even though the vibe is pretty heavy. And just like that, she officially makes her move to leave the Marland house for good. She stops to give them all one final bow, thanking them for raising her all these years as the family watches her go. As she climbs into the carriage, she tells everyone to stay safe too, finally stepping away from her old life. The carriage starts moving down the road, heading toward Linhan where she's supposed to start over, leaving her hometown behind while someone yells out for her to stay strong on the journey ahead. The wheels just keep rolling as the house disappears in the distance, and everything gets quiet until someone calls her name, making her look out the window at the butterflies passing by the carriage. Inside the carriage, Corina looks over and asks Joanna if she's starting to feel tired already. She explains that the trip to Linhan is actually going to take about 10 days. The maid lets her know they'll be taking plenty of breaks along the way, but she still wants Joanna to speak up immediately if the long travel gets to be too much. Joanna gives her a soft smile and says thank you for being so thoughtful, calling Corina by name as the maid just smiles back, happy to help out. Joanna looks out the window, thinking about how the Linhan territory is way up there, even further north than where the Marland family lives. It's basically a massive area sitting at the very northern tip of the Everoja kingdom, a huge piece of land that sits right on the border of the neighboring country. The town seems peaceful enough, and lately, relations with the neighboring country have actually been pretty good. But the real problem is the demon forest nearby, which is apparently crawling with all kinds of monsters. There are even stories about those creatures coming out of the woods to attack people and the territory, so Corina mentions that the Linhan family keeps an order of knights around just to hunt them down. Joanna listens and thinks about how most of the people in that family are born with the Sword Saint skill. She starts wondering if they need that kind of power just to keep their land safe. Usually kids just inherit whatever skills their parents had, but even with that, the Sword Saint skill is still super rare, with only a tiny handful of people in the entire kingdom ever getting it. Turns out Lord Vincent is one of those lucky few, which just makes him even more of a big deal, leaving Joanna staring out the window, trying to figure out what her own role is supposed to be. Joanna stares out the window, thinking about how her whole job here is basically just to have a kid, specifically one who can carry on the family's legendary Sword Saint skill. But then a scary thought hits her. She starts wondering what happens if the kid doesn't get the cool sword skill and just ends up with her weird login bonus instead. She finally steps out of the carriage and is just totally stunned by what she sees, barely managing to let out a wow as she looks around. The place is absolutely massive, and Joanna realizes this is officially the Linhan estate, her new home for the foreseeable future. There's a whole line of maids waiting and bowing for her at the entrance, which feels like a bit much for Joanna as she thinks about how intense this welcome is. Corina leads the way and announces to the lady of the house that they've made it back safely, while Joanna follows closely behind. Margravine Linhan is standing there waiting. She looks super elegant and refined as she gives them a warm welcome back. Joanna immediately goes into formal mode, bowing low and telling the Margravine that it's nice to meet her. She makes sure to introduce herself properly, stating she's Joanna from the house of Count Marland. As she finishes her greeting and says it's a pleasure to be there, the Margravine just watches her, taking in her new guest. The lady of the house reaches out with a warm welcome to Linhan. She introduces herself as Serena, Lord Vincent's mother, and gives Joanna a really friendly smile. Serena looks genuinely happy, telling Joanna she's been looking forward to this meeting for a while. She offers to show her around the massive estate, leading the way down the hall as Joanna follows. While they walk, Serena apologizes that her husband isn't around right now, feeling bad that he's missing her arrival after she traveled such a long way to get there. Joanna quickly waves it off, telling her it's really not a big deal at all. Serena mentions that someone else was also excited to see her, but unfortunately, they're currently stuck outside inspecting the domain and won't be back just yet. Since it's been a long trip, Serena suggests they grab some dinner once Joanna's had a chance to rest up. Serena asks Joanna if she'd like to head up and hang out in her room for a bit. Joanna follows her in and spots a vase of flowers on the side, noticing the nice setup. Serena starts talking about the menu, mentioning she ordered a ton of local ingredients specifically. She asks if there's anything Joanna doesn't like to eat. Joanna gets a little flustered, telling her she's really not picky and will eat whatever is served. Hearing that makes Serena smile, and she says she's genuinely happy to hear it. She tells Joanna to really look forward to the meal tonight, leaving her to get settled in while Joanna hops into a steaming hot bath to finally relax after that long trip. After the soak, the maid helps her get dressed, tying a massive bow on the back of her gown. The maid sets down a fresh cup of Arrow's tea for her to try, and the second Joanna takes a sip, she looks completely blown away by how amazing it tastes. Joanna looks down at the cup, thinking the tea smells great and has a really nice red color. She takes a big sip to try it out, but as soon as the liquid hits her tongue, she completely loses it because of how sour it is, making a face and realizing she can't handle the tartness. She asks the maid if she can add some sugar to the mix, while the maid just stands there thinking the lady is acting pretty cute. The sugar cubes get dropped in and she takes another sip, looking a lot more relaxed now. She looks up and tells the maid it's actually delicious now, feeling a lot better. The maid gives her a warm smile and says she's really glad it's finally to her liking. She lets Joanna know that the tea is also great when it's served cold, so she'll make sure to bring it to her chilled like that next time she wants a cup. As they hear some noise from the hallway, Joanna asks if that means it's finally time for dinner. The sound of a cart rattling fills the room as the maid mentions that Lady Serena really went all out. She went and got special ingredients that you can only find locally in Linhan. The maid says dinner is going to be a total feast, and Joanna's eyes start sparkling because she's so excited for the meal, but she stops in her tracks and thinks about how amazing the place looks. Joanna stands there looking at the massive room, realizing it's easily twice the size of the dining hall back at her house. Serena tells her to go ahead and have a seat, but Joanna gets distracted by a large painting hanging on the wall. She looks up at a portrait of the family, seeing a younger, unscarred Vincent standing with his parents. Serena notices her looking and explains that the portrait was painted right around the time Vincent graduated from the academy. She goes on to say that back when that was made, he was actually the exact same age as Joanna is right now, making her realize just how much has changed since then. Serena leads the way, suggesting they finally sit down and get started with their meal. The maid starts things off by serving in a Lowe's salad, while Serena asks Joanna if she's had any tea yet. Joanna smiles and tells her that she already had some and it tasted great. Serena looks relieved, saying she's really happy to hear she enjoyed it as they settle into the massive dining room. The maid brings out the main course next, which turns out to be a thick minotaur steak. As the food is served, Serena explains that monster meat is a total luxury item that big-time foodies love, and adds that it's actually a huge favorite of the crown prince back in the capital. She goes on to say that because Linhan is so far away from the center of the kingdom, she gives a little wink, telling Joanna that they have local stuff here that even the royal family rarely gets to eat. Joanna just sits there completely overwhelmed, unable to believe she's about to eat something that fancy. Serena looks over at Joanna, mentioning that she might feel a bit hesitant at first, but she's positive that Joanna will get used to the lifestyle here soon enough. Joanna gets a bit flustered and says that's not it, she just thought the food looked amazing. Serena asks if that's really all it is, sounding a bit surprised, and mentions the next dish will be just as good, leaving Joanna looking pretty overwhelmed. The sun goes down over the Linhan estate, and Joanna realizes this place is actually really nice. She finally gets into bed for the night, feeling a lot more relaxed than she expected. As she closes her eyes, she thinks about how Lord Vincent is probably a wonderful person too, and finally drifts off to sleep after whispering good night to herself. Morning comes around and the birds are out, as someone nearby starts asking a question. Serena and Joanna sit down for some tea in a quiet room, and Serena starts things off by asking if Joanna knows about Vincent's actual condition. Joanna nods and mentions the rumors she heard, how he was apparently poisoned after getting hurt by a monster, which left him unable to move his body the way he used to. Serena then brings up his past fiancé, asking if Joanna knew about her too, and Joanna admits she's aware of the situation. Serena looks down at her tea, saying she knows it must have been tough for Joanna to say no to this, especially since the whole marriage was a direct request coming from the royal family. She looks Joanna right in the eyes with a kind expression, telling her that if she's really not into this engagement, she has the choice to just walk away and turn the whole thing down right now, even before she has to go through the trouble of meeting Vincent face to face. Serena adds that she'll take the heat and deal with the royal family herself, which catches Joanna completely off guard. Serena tells Joanna they can easily find a way to call off the engagement without it looking bad for her, and Joanna just sits there, shaking a bit before looking up with a blush, saying she's actually really glad she made the trip to Linhan after all. She explains that because Serena welcomed her with such genuine kindness, she realized something, figuring that if Serena is this nice, then Lord Vincent has to be a pretty amazing person as well. Serena just watches her, thinking she really needs to confess the truth, but Joanna keeps going, mentioning there's still one major thing weighing on her mind. She admits she's been really anxious about the possibility of having a child with Lord Vincent, and the idea of that kid inheriting her totally useless login skill is what's really getting to her. Serena listens quietly as Joanna looks down, admitting that the whole thought of passing that on just scares her a little. Joanna starts to tear up from the stress of it all, so Serena reaches out toward her, gently petting her hair and telling her that, around here, nobody is ever going to judge a person's worth based on their skill. Serena tells Joanna that her login skill is a gift from God too, and she truly believes that there's a real purpose behind her having it. Serena looks at her kindly and says that even if her future child ends up with that same skill, it's totally fine, pulling Joanna into a warm hug and telling her she'll just need to nurture the kid and help them grow into whatever it is they actually love doing. The room goes quiet for a second as Serena thinks about her son Vincent, before she finally starts talking about Crown Prince Cedric and the day he got injured. She explains that the prince was actually trying to protect his best friend from the academy, recalling how they had all headed into the demon forest with their guards about 2 years ago. Normally, those two were so strong that most monsters they ran into didn't stand a chance. Serena continues her story, looking back on that specific day when everything changed. Vincent was out in the woods, standing his ground with his sword drawn, when a massive snake monster suddenly lunged out from the trees. Vincent was caught completely off guard, yelling out as the creature closed in, but Prince Cedric jumped in at the last second, pushing him away and taking the bite right on the arm. Serena explains that at first it just looked like a normal bite, but it didn't stay that way, and things started getting worse really fast. The prince ended up stuck in bed with a fever while dark bruises started to show up all over his skin. He eventually told her that he couldn't even move his body anymore, and the king was absolutely losing it with worry seeing his son like that. Serena mentions they called in the best doctors and healers to check her over, but nothing worked, and ever since that day, things have just been getting worse for them. She admits they still don't even know the cause, while Joanna listens with a worried look, but then Serena looks her in the eye and asks if she's finally ready to see him. Joanna gives a soft smile, looking a lot more determined than before. She says she is, so they finish up their tea while the maid stands by. Serena leads her down the hall and stops, telling her that they've reached Vincent's room. They head inside and Serena introduces Joanna to him. Joanna's eyes go wide the second she sees who's waiting for her. There sits Vincent, bandages covering half his face, but he still looks at her with a gentle smile. Joanna starts things off by telling Vincent it's nice to meet him. She officially introduces herself as Joanna from the house of Count Marland. She follows that up by saying she's really looking forward to their time together. Vincent greets her right back and introduces himself too. Then he asks her to excuse his appearance since he's still all bandaged up. He catches her off guard by telling her she has really beautiful red eyes, making her blush while he admits he's just genuinely happy to finally meet her. Vincent starts making small talk, saying the trip from Marland must have been exhausting, so Joanna lets him know the whole journey ended up taking about 10 days. She gives him a sweet smile and mentions they took plenty of breaks along the way. Joanna keeps the conversation light by saying Corina told her all kinds of stories, so the long trip wasn't boring at all. Corina even lets it slip that Vincent was actually a pro at catching bugs when he was just a little kid. Vincent is totally thrown off by the random embarrassing memory and just wonders what is even going on right now. Joanna gets a little flustered, stopping mid-sentence as the atmosphere in the room starts to shift. Vincent gets straight to the point and asks Joanna if she's already heard the truth about his condition. She tells him she has, mentioning that Lady Serena filled her in on all the details before she arrived, so Vincent looks away, admitting he feels pretty ashamed because he can't even stand up, let alone walk around on his own anymore. He brings up how he knows Crown Prince Cedric was the one who forced this engagement to go through, and then he tells her that if they act fast, he can talk to the prince and get the engagement cancelled legally. Vincent looks at her and says she's a young, beautiful woman who deserves better, making Joanna blush as he continues, admitting he doesn't think someone like him is the right fit, because in his mind, she really should be marrying a healthy and wonderful man instead. Later on, Joanna is busy looking through the books in the estate's collection, but she ends up pretty disappointed, thinking about how this book doesn't have any of the info she's looking for. She originally came to this room because she heard there was a library, but as she checks the shelves, she realizes the entire collection is almost entirely focused on medicine and drugs, and she figures Lady Serena must have been the one who ordered all these specific books for the house. Suddenly, a voice calls out her name from behind, and it's just Corina, who shows up with some tea and asks if she wants to take a quick break. Corina starts pouring some fresh tea, the steam rising up from the pot as she asks Joanna if she actually managed to find anything useful in all those library books. Joanna just shakes her head and says she didn't find a single thing, looking pretty down as she admits she really wanted to be helpful to Lord Vincent, but things aren't going her way. She notices a snack on the table and asks what it is, and Corina smiles, telling her they're ricotta cookies. She goes on to say that Lord Vincent was the one who personally asked for them to be served to her. Hearing that makes Joanna remember a conversation they had just the other day, where Vincent was telling her all about how ricotta is a specific summer fruit, and how he thinks the fruit looks totally adorable. Vincent mentions that with winter coming up, they can only get the dried version of the fruit, but he's sure she'll like them since they're still really sweet and delicious. Joanna smiles back and says she definitely wants to try the fresh ones someday. She's blushing, thinking about how he actually remembered what she liked. Even though it's only been a few weeks since she moved to Linhan, Vincent's kindness always makes her feel so warm. The two of them are just relaxing in the library when someone suddenly shows up at the door. It's Serena, and she asks Joanna if she has a second to talk. She wonders if Joanna would like to join her for a shopping trip, so they head out together, arriving at a street lined with nice white buildings and shops. Serena looks over at her and says thanks for coming along for the day. Serena mentions she's always wanted a daughter, so she's really glad they finally get to spend time out together like this. Serena explains how she usually buys from merchants at the estate, but walking around town like this is a lot of fun too, right? Serena leans in and asks what Joanna thinks about looking at some clothes, just us girls. She adds that there's a specific shop she really likes, and they head inside a high-end shop filled with fancy dresses and rows of boots. Joanna is blown away, saying she's never seen so many different clothes before. Serena laughs and asks if everything looks pretty unusual to her. She explains that this city is a major trade hub after all, which is why. Serena explains that a lot of the designs here are actually inspired by clothes from the neighboring countries, and Joanna notices a fancy blanket on display, thinking to herself how nice it looks. Serena catches her looking and mentions that the blanket is actually made from monster fur, which the shopkeeper, Lady Serena, confirms by saying it's surprisingly light and warm to wear. Lady Serena smiles and tells Joanna it feels great, so she should definitely pick it up and check it out. Joanna reaches out to touch the material, realizing it's super silky while still feeling warm. She also really loves the light blue color, and it gets her thinking that something like this would probably look amazing on Lord Vincent. She looks up with her face all red and asks Lady Serena what she thinks about her giving this blanket to Vincent, just looking completely thrilled because she thinks the whole idea is so lovely. Serena gives Joanna a warm smile and says that since she's the one who picked it out, she's positive Vincent will love the gift, which makes Lady Serena ask from the side if the blanket is for someone special. She mentions that since that's the case, the shop actually has a whole outfit made out of that same material. She shows it to Joanna and asks the girl if she'd like to try it on herself. It's a pretty tempting offer, and Serena just watches with a knowing look while Joanna stands there blushing, totally surprised by the idea. Joanna gets super excited about the new clothes while Lady Serena gives a thumbs up in the background. After they finish up at the shop, Serena and Joanna head over to a bright, fancy cafe to grab some tea and relax for a bit. Serena says she's really glad they found such nice clothes, and Joanna happily agrees, though she looks down at her shopping bag and adds that she really hopes Vincent likes what they picked out too. She sits there with her face turning red and her eyes sparkling, just caught up in her own thoughts. Looking around at the fancy decor, Joanna says it's such a wonderful cafe, just taking in the whole vibe while Serena agrees and asks if it's a cute place, clearly enjoying the atmosphere as much as her guest. She goes on to say it's actually her favorite spot in town, and there's a huge display of cakes right there. Lady Serena smiles and says the cakes are really delicious too, but as they sit down, Joanna notices something different. She mentions that it's the first time she's seen Lady Serena with her gloves off, and Lady Serena just looks back and asks if that's really the case. She doesn't seem to mind, but she starts explaining that she was actually pretty good with a sword when she was younger. Because of all that training, she still has calluses on her hands, which is why she doesn't usually show them in public. This surprises Joanna, who realizes that Lady Serena is a sword fighter too. She gets all excited and tells her she'd absolutely love to see her in action sometime. Joanna gives Lady Serena a big smile and tells her she bets she looked really cool as a fighter, but then she just goes back to eating her treat with a little laugh. Things feel really relaxed between them as Lady Serena mentions how much fun it is just having another girl around to hang out with. She goes on about how doing normal stuff like shopping and grabbing tea has actually always been a big dream of hers. Hearing that makes Joanna stop for a second because it turns out she feels the exact same way. She looks over and tells Lady Serena it was her dream too, and then she starts opening up about her past. She explains that she lost her mom when she was still a little kid, which is why being able to go out and do this kind of thing with Lady Serena makes her so happy. Lady Serena thanks her for the day, but Joanna doesn't want to hear it. She says she's the one who's grateful. As they keep eating their dessert, Lady Serena starts to suggest something else they could do together. Serena asks if she can call her by her first name, and Joanna looks completely caught off guard by the offer. Her face turns bright red as she says of course she can. They're sitting there having tea when Serena adds that she would also be really happy if Joanna started calling her mother. It's a huge moment, and Joanna's eyes start to well up with tears. She can barely get out a yes as she realizes how much this actually means to her. She wonders if she can really call this place home and tries out the word mother, still questioning if it's truly okay for her to stay here with people this kind. Moving on to the next day, the sun is up over the estate and things are finally starting to feel a bit different for her. Joanna goes to visit Vincent, and he mentions hearing about her trip into town with his mom. She confirms that they went, telling him how the food and all the new clothes were unlike anything she's ever seen, smiling wider than usual. She finishes by telling him it was just so much fun. Joanna keeps talking about her day, telling Vincent how they had edible flower cakes after shopping, and she goes on about how they all looked so cute and delicious, making her admit she had such a hard time choosing what to eat. Vincent just smiles while listening, but then Joanna mentions there's something else and reaches into her bag. Vincent watches her pull out a folded piece of fabric. She explains she saw it in town yesterday and thought it would definitely suit him. She looks really happy as she blushes, telling him it's going to get cold soon, so she hands him the gift and says he should use it if he wants to. Vincent looks down at the gift with a warm smile and tells her thank you. He adds that he'll treasure it, which makes Joanna's face light up even more. The staff interrupts the quiet moment in the room, calling out to Lord Vincent and Lady Joanna to get their attention. The maid asks what they'd like for lunch, catching them both a bit off guard as Joanna realizes the day is flying by and asks if it's really that time already. She starts to head out, telling Vincent she'll be back tomorrow, but he calls her name to stop her. Vincent looks a little embarrassed with a blush on his face, asking if she'd want to just eat together like they usually do. So they set up a small table right by the bed to share a quiet meal in the room. Joanna looks at the food and notices they're having porridge today, which is when Vincent mentions he hasn't been feeling all that well since yesterday. Joanna starts to worry, but he's quick to tell her it's really nothing serious, though something about his health makes Joanna stop and think as she remembers something important. Vincent looks down at his meal and mentions that his mother was actually pretty weak, explaining how he specifically remembers her having to eat porridge all the time too. Joanna just stares at him for a second with this wide-eyed look on her face. Then she calls out his name, getting his attention while she reaches for the spoon. Vincent is a little confused and asks what she's doing, but she's just focused on blowing on the food to cool it down. She holds the spoon out to him and says, "Here you go," which completely catches him off guard. He's blushing like crazy, but he actually leans in and takes the bite from her. As he starts eating, Joanna asks him if it's too hot for him or if it's just right. Vincent just makes a small sound as they both start feeling a bit shy about the whole thing, leaving him to finally smile and thank her, telling her that the food is actually delicious. Joanna is really happy that he's actually enjoying the food, so she asks if he thinks he can eat a little more. And Vincent, looking totally flustered but happy, asks if it's okay for him to have another serving. The two of them just sit there together, finishing the meal in a nice, quiet moment. The next morning, Joanna wakes up feeling great and lets out a big stretch while the sun shines in. She looks out the window and thinks about how it's such a beautiful day outside, but her thoughts quickly drift back to Vincent, as she wonders if he's starting to feel any better. Right as she's thinking about him, a weird little icon suddenly pops up in her line of sight. She pulls up a screen she's never seen before, which says she's hit 1,000 days of logging in and can trade for a special bonus. Joanna stares at the message about the first-time bonus and starts to realize something, wondering if all the tickets from the last few years have actually been saved up somewhere this entire time. Joanna isn't really sure what this bonus is supposed to be, but if she's able to use it, she figures she might as well give it a try. So she taps the screen and a notification pops up saying she got a skill candy and 5 gacha tickets. She stares at the screen in total confusion because she's never even heard of these words before. So she reaches out and taps the gacha button while wondering what that even means. A guide pops up explaining that 1 ticket gets her 1 spin, and all she has to do is hit start. The instructions keep going, telling her that once it's moving, she just has to hit stop. It says she'll win whatever item the spin lands on, which Joanna finds a little hard to follow. She looks at the floating menu one last time and figures she just needs to hit the start button, and suddenly all these cards start spinning around like crazy right in front of her. The card on the screen shows a fancy glass bottle labeled as holy water. Joanna stares at the result and wonders what holy water is even for. And even though she has no idea what she's looking at, she's still curious, so she decides the whole thing is actually pretty interesting and starts to smile. She looks at the interface and tries to figure out what she should do next, realizing that she's officially picked up this holy water item from the spin. She notices the only thing left to check on the screen is the item box, so she reaches out to tap the button and see what's actually inside. She sees the SSR skill candy and the water sitting there, the rewards from her bonus. Looking at the card, she starts wondering what'll happen if she tries to pull it out. Joanna's eyes go wide and she lets out a quiet gasp as the screen starts to react. Suddenly, a small wrapped candy just appears out of thin air right into her cupped hands. She unwraps it and looks at the little round treat, confusedly asking if this is really just candy, but then she remembers the name from the screen. Since the system calls it a skill candy, she figures it has to be safe to eat and decides to just go for it. The candy makes a tiny sound as it touches her tongue and starts to change. Joanna's face freezes in total shock. She can't believe what she's feeling and realizes right away that this is definitely not some ordinary snack she just swallowed. Her hands start to glow with a strange light, making her realize that the item is actually working. Bright light washes over her, leaving her stunned as the power kicks in. Joanna looks at her desk and thinks it's amazing the screen shows her that the quill is just a writing tool made from bird feathers. Moving on to the ink, she sees a list of ingredients like iron and oak, making her realize just how incredible this new power actually is. She gets a huge smile on her face as it clicks that she actually has a legit appraisal skill now. Looking at a different tool made from some kind of bug, she realizes she can look up absolutely anything she wants and starts running around her bedroom like a kid, pointing at the bed and the furniture while yelling appraisal over and over since she's having the time of her life testing it out. But then Corina suddenly calls her name from right behind her. The maid is just standing there, having watched the whole embarrassing display. Joanna turns bright red and covers her face, telling Corina she really should have said something if she was in the room. Corina just gives a little shrug and says she didn't want to interrupt because Joanna looked like she was having so much fun. So she asks if something good happened to put her in such a great mood, leaving Joanna peeking through her fingers, totally embarrassed. Joanna hides her face in her hands, totally red from the earlier embarrassment, and realizes she really needs to talk to Serena and Vincent about her situation. She tries to act natural and asks Corina what her schedule looks like for the rest of the day. Corina checks the plans and mentions that Lord Vincent actually invited her to grab some lunch, but aside from that one meeting, her afternoon is completely wide open with nothing else planned. Joanna decides to use that free time to finally come clean about her skill, so she sits down with Serena and explains everything. Serena looks pretty deep in thought as she tries to process the whole story. She stares at the notes Joanna wrote down and admits she has never even heard of the terms used in the login bonus system before. While looking at the sketches of the item boxes, Serena asks if the Royal Research Institute had anything specific to say once they finished looking into her case. Joanna explains that the researchers actually gave her strict orders to report back to them immediately if anything weird starts happening. Serena nods along, saying she gets it, especially if there's any chance that things might get dangerous. Joanna waits nervously for a response after dropping the truth about her login bonus skill, wondering if Serena is going to freak out, but she just smiles and suggests they just wait and see how it goes, which completely catches Joanna off guard. Serena keeps the mood light, telling her it'll be fine since nothing actually dangerous is happening right now. Serena's expression gets a bit more serious as she brings up another topic, mentioning that she expects Prince Cedric to show up at the estate pretty soon. Joanna and Vincent both look pretty surprised by the news, so Vincent cuts in and says he'll be the one to talk to him and make sure everything stays under control. Joanna looks up at him and admits that hearing him say that is a huge relief, especially since Vincent reminds her that Cedric is a really reliable guy anyway, so there's probably nothing to worry about. The three of them sit together in the quiet room, the heavy mood finally starting to lift. Serena takes a sip of her tea and goes back to thinking about the login bonus, noting that it really is a pretty wild skill to have. Serena asks just to be sure if Joanna is the only one who can actually see the board, and Vincent confirms that's how it works. So Joanna pulls the screen up right in front of her, explaining that she's got the whole board active and ready to go. Serena leans in close but admits she really can't see a single thing, even though Joanna is looking right at it. Being curious, Serena asks if it's okay for her to try touching the screen, and Joanna tells her to go for it. Serena reaches her hand out into the empty air, her fingers just passing right through where the screen should be like nothing was there. After failing to feel anything, Serena just sits back and takes another sip of her tea while the group sits in a bit of silence. Suddenly, Serena speaks up again, catching both Joanna and Vincent off guard with how fast her mood changed. She gets this huge, excited look on her face and asks Joanna if she can pull the gacha right now just so she can watch. Joanna laughs and tells her she'd be happy to, even though she's thinking that Serena is acting like a little kid right now. She starts pointing at the empty air, showing Serena exactly where the start and stop buttons are located on the invisible board. Joanna describes how the screen shows 4 cards lined up face down. Serena starts to get it, noting that when the start button is pressed, the cards light up one after another. Joanna points to the empty space in front of her, telling them the buttons are right there, while Serena keeps following along, explaining that once you press the button, you just have to stop it on whichever card is currently glowing to get the prize. Joanna laughs as the results come in, telling the group she ended up with holy water again. Serena watches with a smile, admitting that this game is actually a lot of fun, and then she asks Joanna if she can actually see the holy water she just won. Joanna says sure thing. Joanna reaches out and taps the screen to take the item out of her digital inventory, and a small glass bottle of water just appears out of nowhere right in her hand. Joanna holds up the little bottle with a huge smile, telling Vincent that this is the holy water she won. Vincent takes it from her, thanking her and saying the whole thing is truly amazing. Joanna looks at the bottle for a second before a light bulb goes off. She realizes she can check its stats, so she triggers her appraisal skill. The bottle glows as the system explains it's sacred water blessed by the holy water god. Vincent asks if she found anything out, but Joanna just shakes her head and tells him no. She stares at the glass, thinking that even if it is sacred, she's still not really sure what the water is actually supposed to be used for. Just then, a servant steps into the room and calls out to everyone, letting them know that it's almost time for lunch to be served. The staff member stands by and asks the group what they'd like to do next. Joanna realizes how late it's gotten and says she can't believe it's already lunch. Serena gets up with a smile, saying she's going to head out now so the two of them can spend some time alone together. The staff gets everything ready in the dining room as everyone takes their seats for the meal. The servant brings out the food and explains that today's menu features charcoal-grilled white bird, along with some corn soup, a seasonal salad, and some fresh fruit. Joanna looks down at her plate and repeats the name of the bird to herself, wondering exactly what it is. So Vincent explains it's actually a huge bird-like monster that lives nearby. He goes on to say that since their numbers spike during the fall and winter, it's pretty common for them to end up on the dinner table like this. Joanna looks a little unsure about eating a monster, but Vincent tells her they're the most delicious this time of year since they're so fatty. Vincent holds out a skewer of the grilled meat and tells Joanna she should go ahead and try some. She takes a bite and her whole face lights up, clearly loving how it tastes as she hums to herself. Joanna can't believe how good it is, mentioning how the skin is perfectly crispy while the meat is juicy, and Vincent just nods along. Something clicks for Joanna then, and she mentions that the quill she looked at earlier this morning was actually made from the same white bird's feathers. She realizes these monsters are actually really popular for more than just food since people use them for crafting all the time. Vincent watches her enjoy the food with a smile, telling her he's just happy she's actually liking the meal, but then Joanna thinks of something else she wanted to check on, so she stops for a second and looks over at him, asking how he's actually feeling today. Vincent doesn't hesitate and tells her he's already feeling a whole lot better than before. Vincent starts off by apologizing for making Joanna worry so much yesterday, and she tries to jump in to explain how happy she was that he even invited her in the first place, though she still has something on her mind. She admits she's worried about being a burden to him, but Vincent tells her right away that she isn't, and he goes on to say that because she's been coming over to see him, he feels way better about things, even looking forward to his meals every day now. He mentions how he really wishes they could just spend the whole afternoon together, but the medicine he has to take after eating always makes him feel really drowsy. Looking at him, Joanna realizes he's acting all cheerful for her sake, even though he must be in a lot of pain. Vincent changes the subject and asks her about that skill candy, wondering what it actually tasted like, which totally catches Joanna off guard, and she explains it just vanished the moment it touched her tongue. Joanna continues explaining that the candy dissolved so fast in her mouth that she barely got to taste the thing, though she's sure it was actually sweet and pretty delicious. Vincent just laughs it off and says he gets it, but he's still pretty shocked since he's never heard of anyone just randomly gaining new skills out of nowhere like that. Looking at her, Joanna just smiles while thinking about how amazing it is to actually have appraisal now, and she lets out a little laugh, feeling glad she never gave up on hitting that login button. She realizes this is a special reward meant only for her after working hard for a full 1,000 days, while Vincent watches her, mentioning how impressive it is that she managed to get another skill. He gives her a warm, genuine smile and tells her he's honestly happy for her finishing by saying that a gift like this must be a reward from God for all her effort. Joanna sits there blushing, feeling a bit overwhelmed by the conversation, while Vincent repeats the word appraisal to himself, trying to wrap his head around it. He asks if that means she can see info on just about anything, and she tells him he's right. She looks pretty excited as she explains that she can even see the specific materials and components of whatever she looks at. To show him what she means, she says, for example, and reaches out toward him, pointing her finger right at his face, which makes Vincent flinch back in surprise. She catches herself and quickly apologizes, feeling like she was being way too rude, but Vincent just stops her, saying that he's actually the one who should be sorry. He looks away, sounding a bit self-conscious as he asks her if his scarred face looks pretty bad to her. Joanna looks at him with a really kind smile and tells him straight up that she doesn't think so at all. She tells him Lady Serena let her know that he actually got that wound while he was out there protecting someone precious to him. Joanna looks right at him and says his name, telling him straight to his face that she thinks he's a really kind and beautiful person. They sit there together for a second before Vincent quietly says thank you. Things get a little quiet, so Joanna speaks up to change the subject, asking him if he'd be okay with her taking another closer look at that login bonus skill she found earlier. Vincent doesn't mind at all and tells her of course she can, so she starts explaining how it works, mentioning that the light is spinning clockwise right now. She leans in and tells him that if she hits the stop button at just the right time, she can pick the prize, and it turns out she got more holy water again. Vincent watches Joanna work and admits he can't see any of the menus she's looking at. Joanna points out that with 4 different cards, there's gotta be more than just one prize. But Vincent's starting to wonder if holy water is the only thing this gacha actually drops. Joanna decides to show him how she gets the items and says she'll pull the water out of her box. She makes the bottle pop into her hand instantly, which completely catches Vincent off guard. She thinks the magic is amazing every time, while Vincent just laughs and thinks the shortcut is pretty nice. Joanna hands the small bottle over and says this one is for him. Vincent takes it and says thanks. He holds the glass bottle up to the light to get a good look at the gift and stares at it for a second, realizing he's actually holding real holy water. He's pretty impressed by the whole thing, just looking at how sparkly and pretty the liquid is. Vincent looks down at the gift, blushing a bit as he admits he was actually pretty jealous that his mom got a present first. Joanna smiles back at him and mentions how she just got that new lap blanket as well. She looks at him with this soft expression, thinking about how once Lord Vincent finally gets better, she really hopes that when that day comes, they can all do something fun as a group. She even suggests they should all go out and do some shopping together sometime. Later on, Joanna is finally by herself and lets out a big sigh of relief, just glad the whole interaction went so well. She checks her system and realizes she actually scored another login ticket today. It's a huge relief because she was honestly worried the tickets were just a one-time thing from yesterday. Since it looks like she's going to be getting these things every single day now, she figures there's no harm in testing her luck and using her last 3 tickets right now. Joanna takes a deep breath and gets ready to roll. She says here goes as she hits the button. The first card pops up on the screen, and it's just another bottle of holy water. She tries again, but the next card is exactly the same, another bottle of holy water. The third card starts to appear, and she's already starting to say holy water again, but then she stops mid-sentence and covers her mouth in total shock. She can't believe it's actually something else. Joanna is so happy she's practically shaking, celebrating the fact that she finally pulled a card that isn't holy water. She takes a closer look at the new item, a plant called a dispal herb, though after thinking about it for a second, she realizes she's never even heard of a plant with that name. She knows she won't be able to get a proper appraisal on it unless she physically takes the item out of her inventory. But even so, she can't shake the feeling that the herb looks really familiar for some reason. Joanna heads into the massive family library to do some research. She figures the book she's looking for has to be around here. She scans the rows of old books until one catches her eye, reaching out to grab it from the shelf. She finds the right page and realizes she hit the jackpot. The dispal herb is a legendary medicine from a far-off kingdom that's almost impossible to find. The realization hits her pretty hard, and she just stares at the book. She can't believe she actually has a rare medicinal herb in her hands. She starts blushing as she thinks about the possibilities, realizing this herb might be the key to finally treating Lord Vincent's condition. Later that night, Serena sits at her desk and starts writing in her journal. She's still stuck thinking about the skill candy and holy water. She looks down at her notes, thinking to herself that she's never once heard of an item that can just grant people new skills like that. The quill moves across the paper as she considers the mystery, figuring that just because she hasn't heard of them doesn't mean they aren't real. So she's pretty convinced that whatever Joanna is holding onto is probably more valuable than anything else they own. Joanna rests peacefully, while the weight of her power sinks in having the ability to create such precious items makes her a total game changer. Serena worries that if word about Joanna's skill gets out, people with bad intentions will come after her, a dark shadow reaching for the girl while she sleeps. She imagines Joanna being hauled away by soldiers, terrified of what might happen if the royal family or other powerful houses catch wind of her power. If that ever happens, there's no telling how Joanna would be treated by the people who want to use her, making Serena look pretty stressed out as she stares off into the distance. But then she looks at a family portrait of her husband Kelvin, and a young Vincent. She quietly thinks of Kelvin's name and starts thinking about how much has changed since Joanna first showed up here. Because Vincent has actually been smiling a lot more lately, looking just like he used to before the accident happened. Joanna is finally getting used to her new life in Linhan too, and seeing them happy makes Serena more determined than ever. She clenches her hands and decides that while Kelvin is away, she's the one who has to protect them both. Later on, Vincent is seen looking pretty relaxed and smiling, telling someone that they've got a really lovely mask on. Vincent mentions that he actually had his new mask custom made, explaining to Joanna that he figured it would be a lot better than just wearing bandages all the time, making Joanna smile wide as she tells him it looks really good on him. Vincent looks a bit relieved and just tells her thank you, but then Joanna has a sudden realization. She thinks to herself that, come to think of it, Serena had asked her earlier if Vincent said anything about her new clothes. Joanna had to admit that he didn't say a single word about them, which makes her giggle as she imagines Serena complaining about that boy and how he acts. She can't help but laugh, so Vincent looks over at her, noticing she's acting a bit weird, and asks if something is wrong. Joanna gets a little flustered but plays it off, telling him she just remembered something funny. She thinks to herself that she'll definitely keep that thought a secret. She decides to change the subject in her head and gets herself hyped up to roll the gacha again for the day. Since then, whenever Vincent is feeling up for it, the two of them have started pulling the gacha together, which has become a bit of a routine. Vincent sits back on his bed and asks Joanna what she managed to get for the day. Joanna looks at the new card in her hand and says she has never seen this one before. It shows a small bottle, and she reads the name out loud, wondering what exactly a basic potion is. She turns to Vincent and asks if he knows what it is, and he just smiles and says of course he does. He starts explaining that it is actually a type of medicine, pointing out that there are actually a ton of different kinds of these things. He tells her that a basic potion like that can heal up stuff like cuts and bruises in an instant. He clarifies that it is not really meant for any major wounds or serious injuries, but he finishes by saying it is still a super handy type of medicine to keep around just in case. Vincent keeps going, saying how caravans and knights use those potions all the time, and Joanna just stares, finally getting what they are. She starts thinking to herself that maybe one day she will be able to find a real medicine through this system that can actually cure whatever is making Vincent sick. Right then, a huge notification pops up saying she hit a 10-pull milestone, giving her a bunch of tickets and even expanding her storage. Joanna just freezes up completely, staring at the screen like she can't believe what she's reading. Vincent notices her spacing out and asks if she is okay, trying to get her attention. She snaps out of it and explains to him that another one of those weird screens just appeared out of nowhere. Looking at the options, she realizes this new gacha lets her roll 10 times at once, but that's not what's bothering her. She starts getting worried that if she uses the big multi-pull option, she will end up having fewer chances to sit here and roll the gacha with Vincent, making her look pretty sad until he calls her name again. Vincent gives a gentle smile and tells Joanna not to look so worried. She snaps out of it and apologizes, saying she just got a little lost in her own head. Even though she's curious about the new 10-pull gacha, she stays focused on the guy in front of her. And then Vincent suggests they should probably go talk to his mother first. Later on, Serena asks Joanna if she can come back once her mother returns, apologizing for the timing, but Joanna quickly says she's the one who is sorry for causing any trouble. Serena just laughs it off and tells her it's totally fine, looking happy to have her around. She stands there with a kind look, clearly grateful for Joanna's company. Then Serena mentions how ever since Vincent started his treatment, things have been pretty tough, so there haven't been many chances for him to actually enjoy anything new until now. Serena gives a soft smile and tells Joanna that things are only looking up now because of her. She goes on to say how happy she is to finally be able to do things with her son again. Joanna can't help but blush a little at the praise, quietly thanking her as they sit together. Serena looks over some papers at the table and says she understands the situation, while the system notification pops up to explain that 10 tickets allow for a special 10-pull gacha. Joanna processes the info and realizes she can actually do 10 roles all at once now. She starts curious about the different ranks, wondering what the R symbol even stands for. Holding her quill, she remembers the skill candy had an SSR tag and wonders if it's all connected. But then Serena speaks up, admitting that while she isn't sure what might happen next, she mentions that the offer or item they're discussing will expire by the end of the day. Serena looks at the screen and asks if they should go ahead and spin it. Joanna gets a bit shy and asks Serena if she wouldn't mind doing the honors instead. Serena doesn't hesitate at all and happily agrees to help her out. She gets ready and says, "Let's do this," while Joanna watches with a really tense look. Serena announces she's hitting the 10 pull button right now to see what they get. A finger reaches out and taps the start button on the glowing screen. The whole interface flashes with a bright light as the magic kicks in. A bunch of cards suddenly fly out and fill up the entire display. Joanna just stares in shock, so Vincent speaks up and asks how the pull went. She looks over the list, noting she got 4 holy waters and 2 death balls so far. Joanna starts writing down the loot they just pulled, mostly just basic stuff like herbs, a beginner potion, and a gacha ticket. She keeps looking down the list to see if there's anything better. And then, it turns out they actually snagged an intermediate potion and a super rare item called the Tear of the Goddess. Serena and Vincent both freak out a little, seeing such high-level items pop up like it's nothing. The two of them share a look, completely blown away by Joanna's luck as they start explaining that intermediate potions are way more powerful than the beginner ones, and they're usually reserved for treating really bad stuff like deep gashes or broken bones. Joanna gets hopeful and asks if these could help with his illness, but Vincent just says they've tried it all before without any luck. She looks down, feeling kind of silly for thinking it would be that easy, while Vincent tells her not to be disappointed, because honestly, pulling items like that is still pretty amazing. Vincent explains that the potions they found are actually a huge help whenever the knights have to head into the demon forest. But the conversation takes a turn when he brings up the Tears of the Goddess item Joanna found. Even with all his experience, Vincent admits he's never even heard of an item like that existing. Serena stays quiet for a second, looking like she's trying to dig through her memories to find a lid. She finally speaks up and tells them that she actually knows what the Tears of the Goddess are, though she warns Joanna that her memory of the details is a little fuzzy. Apparently, it's not a common item you find in shops, but something straight out of ancient folklore. Serena starts telling the story, saying that if she remembers the old legends correctly, everything started a long time ago, way before their country was even founded, back when the entire world was falling apart, and humans were actually facing total extinction. Serena's story starts with a massive, unknown disease spreading across the land, leaving everyone who caught it in total pain until they eventually died from it. The people were completely terrified, watching their neighbors suffer in the streets without any cure, so right when the whole world was about to give in to total despair, the goddess finally appeared, looking down at the suffering below her. While the land was still covered in darkness, she looked on with sadness, and eventually the goddess let out a single tear for the humans. The moment she did, a blinding light covered the entire world, and as flowers began to bloom across the earth, the people finally found their hope again. Serena finishes the legend by saying the item was likely filled with the power to save the world. Joanna and Vincent are both totally stunned by the legend Serena just told. They're actually holding hands without even realizing it as Joanna says how incredible the whole story is. Suddenly, they both notice they're still touching and pull their hands away fast, both of them turning bright red from the embarrassment. Vincent looks away and apologizes for the move, while Joanna just stares down at her lap, shyly telling him it's fine. The room gets quiet, so they just focus on tea and snacks to break the vibe. Serena watches them struggle and giggles at how cute they're being together. Later on, Serena walks Joanna through the hallway and thanks her for spending the day there. Joanna gives her a huge smile and wishes her a good night, feeling closer to her than before. But before Joanna can leave, Serena stops her and says there's something important. She wants Joanna to keep her special skills and everything they talked about today a secret. She tells Joanna that for a little while, this needs to stay just between the two of them. Serena adds that they're even keeping the research institute in the dark for now, making Joanna realize just how big of a deal this secret actually is. Joanna blushes and gives a small smile, telling Serena that she totally understands the situation, and she realizes that Serena is just being kind, asking if she's only saying these things to keep her from worrying so much. Corina the maid pipes up, a bit nervous as she mentions how she has the support of the mother-in-law and the lord. And then she adds that Vincent and the rest of the people in Linhan are right there with her too. Joanna looks over at Serena with a huge happy expression, saying that knowing everyone is behind her is incredibly reassuring. Serena looks back at her with a gentle smile and says she's really glad to hear that. And then the night finally winds down as they stand by the door, Serena tells Joanna good night and wishes her sweet dreams. Once Joanna is gone, Serena stands alone in the quiet hallway, thinking back on the legend of the goddess's tears. She looks down, feeling a bit conflicted because she really didn't want to worry the girl, so she intentionally kept some things to herself, thinking about how she told Joanna the story but left out the most serious details. Serena walks down the long hallway alone, thinking that maybe she was just worrying over nothing after all, and then back in her room, Joanna lies in bed staring at the goddess's tears item on her glowing screen. The item shows up as a sharp crystal shard, and it's clearly labeled as the legendary goddess's tears. She looks at the bright glow coming from the screen, wondering what this thing actually is, because she's worried it might turn out to be something useless or weird like dispel grass. She remembers that she was told to keep it inside her item box until they figured out more about it, but she just can't help being super curious about the whole thing. Joanna kicks her feet while lying on the bed, wondering if it's actually a liquid since it's called a tear and what color it would be. As she taps on her system screen, she starts wondering what kind of scent a legendary item like that would have. She looks toward the window, thinking about everything that's happened since she first got to this place. Joanna lies in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about how many strange things have been happening lately, and she really wishes she could find something to help out, because her main goal right now is finding a way to cure Lord Vincent's illness. She starts thinking back to when they were out in town together, just the two of them walking around, and she can't stop thinking about Lord Vincent's hand. He looked pretty flustered at the time, but she was mostly just surprised by how big his hand was and how rugged it felt while their fingers were interlaced like that. Joanna blushes just thinking about it, realizing she never knew it would feel like this, mostly because she's never actually held hands barehanded with any guy besides her own father. The memory of his hand just won't leave her head. Joanna is still stuck on the memory of the walk, thinking about how warm his hand felt. And back at the estate, Serena brings things back to reality while pouring tea, mentioning how chilly the morning was. Serena looks over and asks Joanna if she felt the cold earlier, and Joanna admits that she did. So Serena explains that Joanna's old home in Marland was likely much warmer, telling her not to hesitate to speak up and let her know whenever she's feeling a bit too cold. The two of them share a quiet moment together, with Serena looking at her warmly, until a maid suddenly bursts into the room shouting Serena's name, apologizing for the big interruption. The maid is completely out of breath as she shouts that the master of the house has just returned. The news causes a total stir, with someone stumbling over their words in a panic while heading for the stairs. Serena looks like she's seen a ghost, totally blindsided by the fact that her husband is home so soon. Kelvin finally steps through the door and announces he's back, while Serena just stands there calling out his name in total shock. He looks right at Joanna and tells her it's nice to meet her. He doesn't waste any time introducing himself, saying he's Kelvin, Vincent's dad and the guy in charge around here. So Serena steps up and introduces Joanna as Vincent's fiancé to make things official. Joanna keeps it polite and tells Lord Kelvin it's nice to meet him too, explaining that she's Joanna from the Earl of Marland's family. She gives a formal bow and tells him it's a real pleasure to meet him. Kelvin acknowledges her, saying it's nice to meet her as well. They shake hands while he repeats that he's the head of the household, and then he lets her know that Serena has already told him plenty about her. Kelvin mentions how Serena told him all about how Joanna makes sure to eat lunch with Vincent every single day. He looks her right in the eye and gives her a sincere thank you for being there for his son. Kelvin pulls Serena into a hug and tells her he's finally home. And as she welcomes him back, Joanna watches them, thinking about how she knew they were a tight-knit family. Vincent has a soft smile on his face while he watches his parents together. Joanna can't help but notice the resemblance, thinking to herself that Vincent really is the perfect mix of both of them. Later at the dinner table, Kelvin starts things off by apologizing for the late greeting, explaining to everyone that he's been busy out in the field lately inspecting the territory. He mentions that based on what he saw out there, the cold is going to be pretty brutal this year, pointing out that even though winter is just getting started, the mountains are already buried in snow. Then his expression gets a bit more serious, like he's about to get down to business. Kelvin shifts the conversation over to Joanna's skill, bringing up the one thing she's been carrying for so long, telling her that he knows how hard she's worked and how tough it must have been for her to be all alone with that burden. He points out how there was no end in sight, especially after the Research Institute gave up and made their final decision, saying that even though the investigation officially wrapped up back then, they still told her she had to keep up with the same routine every day just in case. Joanna starts to tear up, thinking back to how anxious she felt during those days, remembering when she'd sit alone in her room wondering why she even bothered doing this every day. She'd just stare at her screen and ask herself if there was actually any point to the task, eventually just face-planting on the couch because she was so close to just quitting for good. Joanna stays face down on the couch, crying and wondering why all of this is happening, thinking to herself that maybe she just wasn't the person everyone thought she was, and that she definitely wasn't gifted with water magic after all. She looks back at the ceremony with tears in her eyes, wondering how life would be if she'd just been given a different skill. Back at the dinner table, she pulls herself together and thanks Serena and Kelvin for being so supportive, but Kelvin wants to dig a little deeper, asking her if she can explain the details a bit more. He listens closely to her story, eventually nodding and saying he gets the picture now, processing the crazy news about the 10-pull gacha and the item known as the goddess's tears. Kelvin looks pretty serious about it, admitting that things are starting to get way out of hand, until Serena jumps in, telling him she's got something to add to the conversation. While picking at her food, Joanna hears the news that next week, things are about to change because Cedric is officially scheduled to visit Linhan, which sends Joanna into a total state of shock since it turns out the Crown Prince isn't just coming for a social call. He actually wants to look into the details of Joanna's rare skill, putting her right in the middle of a high-stakes investigation. Joanna starts to panic, looking down and desperately wondering what she's supposed to do now, mostly because she never got to attend any evening parties back at her old home and doesn't know the first thing about etiquette. The thought of making a huge mistake in front of royalty starts to eat at her, leaving her terrified that she'll just make a total fool of herself. So she finally admits to Kelvin and Serena that she's never even been to a party like this. Kelvin just laughs it off, telling her not to worry because Cedric is the kind of guy who doesn't sweat the small stuff, so a few minor blunders here and there won't be a problem at all, even though Joanna is still feeling the pressure. Serena tries to calm Joanna down, telling her that since Cedric is Vincent's friend, she really shouldn't be so nervous about meeting him, she just needs to relax, and Serena promises her that everything is going to turn out just fine. Then Serena mentions that Joanna is going to need a nice dress for the visit, already starting to wonder which colors would look best, leaving Joanna to head out of the room while the staff watches her go. Once they're alone, Serena leans her head on Kelvin's shoulder as they sit together by the window, and Kelvin takes a second to apologize for putting her through so much stress with everything going on lately. Serena doesn't mind at all, telling him she'd do anything for her sweet daughter. So, it's really no trouble for her, and Kelvin just gives a little laugh as they sit there. Serena keeps smiling, thinking about how Joanna is such an honest and lovely person, and she says out loud that the girl really is just the best. Serena leans her head on Kelvin, telling him that's the reason she's so set on protecting the girl no matter what happens. And Kelvin jokingly tells her he'll wring her neck if she says sweet things like that when he isn't looking. He looks down at the papers, mentioning that from the little bit he's heard, the skill she has is actually pretty incredible, and it turns out Cedric feels the exact same way about her. Back when Cedric was sitting alone, he had actually admitted that if she wasn't already engaged to Vincent, he would have wanted her for himself, just because of how special she is. In the present, Serena realizes the timing is off and mentions that Cedric wasn't supposed to visit until later. So she asks Kelvin if he was the one who told him to come early, and he just gives a quiet "ah" in response. Kelvin explains that he wanted to get a chance to talk to him before any of this information starts leaking out. But Serena's mind is still on Joanna, and she can't help but say that she really is such a sweet girl. Vincent sits there with bandages all over his face, but he's smiling anyway, and Joanna just holds his hand, as Serena points out that Vincent has clearly developed some really deep feelings for her too. Kelvin gives her a confident look and tells her to just leave the rest to him because everything is going to be fine. The two of them sit together looking out. Serena hears him, but she still has a few things on her mind. Kelvin mentions how Serena and Joanna have become pretty much inseparable lately, and then he laughs about how he's actually excited for the day he gets to be called father by her. Suddenly, Joanna's eyes go wide and she freezes up because right in front of her, yet another one of those weird system screens has popped up out of nowhere. She peeks her head out from behind the massive door to check the hallway, thinking to herself how great it is that everyone was planning on having lunch together today. Joanna is about to head off and report what she found, but then she stops when she sees two people waiting. One of them is a guy in glasses who smiles and tells Joanna it's a real pleasure to meet her. Joanna looks a bit surprised as the man introduces himself as Paolo Lacconi, and then he gives a polite bow while holding his medical bag, explaining that he's actually Vincent's new doctor. He mentions that he was sent over specifically because of a referral from the royal palace, and Joanna tries to be polite, telling him the pleasure is all hers and that she's looking forward to working with him. She puts on a smile, but deep down she starts to get this really weird vibe that she can't explain. As she watches him walk away, she just can't shake the feeling that something bad is about to happen. Later on, Kelvin walks into the room with Serena and Corina to find Vincent, calling out his name, And when he sees his son, he tells him that the new mask and eye patch actually suit him pretty well. Vincent thanks his dad for the compliment and mentions he actually had the new gear custom made. He explains that the fabric is pretty special since it's woven from threads taken from monsters. Kelvin leans in to get a closer look, sounding impressed while he says that's some seriously good material. Joanna and Vincent sit quietly at the table together, both looking pretty relaxed, and Joanna realizes that this is actually the first time all four of them have sat down for a meal like this. As the maid starts serving the food, Vincent tells everyone he's really looking forward to eating. And then Serena starts laughing as she remembers the past, telling Joanna that Vincent was such a handful as a kid. She explains that back then, every single time Kelvin had to head out to go hunt monsters, little Vincent would throw a fit and insist on going along with him. It was always a total mess because he'd constantly try to sneak onto the carriages when no one was looking. The flashback shows little Vincent desperately trying to climb onto the carriage while calling out for his mother. Kelvin watches the memory and remarks that it was a good thing Serena had been trained in the way of the sword, because without those skills, dealing with a kid as energetic as Vincent would have been impossible. Serena laughs and agrees that those crazy days are long gone, while Vincent blushes and tries to say it's all in the past. Joanna watches them, thinking about how Serena usually comes off as such a calm and mature person, but Vincent is clearly dying of embarrassment, telling his mom that she shouldn't be saying stuff like that in front of everyone, and he keeps begging her to just be quiet before things get any more awkward. Serena just smiles and asks if Joanna has a hidden childish side too, just as the maid steps in to place a fresh plate on the table, announcing that she's serving up the wild boar monster sandwiches. Joanna looks completely stunned by the choice of food, and Serena explains that it's actually one of Kelvin's favorite meals. A fatty steak is usually great, but sometimes a change of pace is exactly what's needed, especially since Kelvin mentions he really loves having these sandwiches when they're paired with a refreshing ricotta sauce. As the food is served, Serena tells Joanna she hopes the meal is to her liking, while Joanna finally takes a bite. Joanna's face immediately lights up with sparkles. She's clearly caught off guard by the amazing flavor. She can't believe how tender the meat is, noting that there isn't even a hint of gaminess to it, and the whole thing basically just melts in her mouth the second she starts eating it. She's internally losing it over how good everything tastes, completely distracted by the meal. Kelvin is right there with her, happily saying that the wild boar is absolutely delicious. Serena leans in close to her husband and whispers that Joanna is actually eating with her hands to match Vincent, since his injuries make it hard for him to use a fork and knife, and Kelvin just nods, finally seeing why she's doing it. The fancy silver knives sit on the edge of the plate next to the last of the food, and the whole group keeps eating together, enjoying the rare moment of everyone getting along at dinner. Joanna looks down at her tea and mentions that something interesting happened earlier that morning. She thinks back to when she pulled up her skill screen and saw something totally unexpected, because she says she just hit the login button like she does every single day. But this time, a completely different notification suddenly popped up in front of her. The screen told her she hit a consecutive login milestone, unlocking a new exchange feature and giving her 100 coins. She repeats the word exchange to herself, trying to figure out how this new part of her skill works, and realizes that once she finally closes out of this new menu, she'll still end up getting her regular login ticket just like always. Kelvin looks over some papers while listening, just as a notification pops up saying Joanna got 10 more coins. She explains that if you look at the menu right under the ticket count, you'll see a brand new coin category has been added, showing she's got 100 coins that expire by the end of the day. But that's not all, because a new exchange button showed up too, and the system explains she can trade those coins for items she's already won from the gacha before, so she realizes she can actually swap her currency for useful stuff. Since the coins are set to expire tonight, Joanna tells Kelvin and the others that she has to trade them for something before the day is over, so she starts checking the list to see what her options are, and it turns out she can pick between more gacha tickets or even some holy water. Serena points up with a smile and suggests that Joanna should just go for a ticket. She's acting all excited, thinking about the chance of pulling something really rare again. Kelvin chuckles and says he guessed she's right, while Joanna just smiles along with them. She decides to go for it and taps the screen to exchange her points for one gacha ticket. Vincent looks over and asks if the exchange actually worked out for her, and Joanna beams, telling him that it did and she's got an extra ticket in her inventory now. As they sit around the dinner table, she starts wondering when the best time to use it would be, but then a voice calls out to Master Vincent, catching his attention right away. The staff brings over his medicine on a small dish, and Vincent quietly thanks them as Joanna stares at the pills in his hand, looking pretty surprised by what she's seeing. Vincent holds the small pills in his hand and mentions they have a really strong scent, but he follows up by saying it's actually a huge improvement over what he's had before. He explains that his old doctor used to give him this powder that smelled completely gross, while Paulo's work is a different story. So he starts comparing his current doctor's medicine, calling it amazing and even asking Joanna if she wants to take a closer look at it herself. He adds that being in pill form makes it way easier to swallow than the old stuff. So Joanna leans in and starts wondering what kind of ingredients are actually in this medicine. She closes her eyes for a second and decides to use her appraisal skill on the spot. Her eyes snap open in total shock the moment the system information pops up. The screen says it's straight-up poison that destroys organs over time. And it's basically designed to kill him in a few years. Joanna is so rattled by the system's warning that her hands start shaking. And as Vincent calls out her name, she accidentally lets the pill slip right through her fingers, sending it tumbling down until it hits the floor. She lets out a tiny gasp, realizing she just dropped the evidence. Serena starts to check on her, but Joanna just looks down and starts apologizing while her whole body continues to shiver. Then she stands up so fast her chair screeches across the floor, making a loud scraping sound. Serena immediately moves in and puts a hand on her shoulder to calm her down, but Joanna is off in her own head, clutching her dress and wondering who could actually be behind something this messed up. She thinks back to Paulo, the polite doctor everyone seems to trust, and starts wondering if that guy is really the one planning to take Vincent's life. The realization hits her hard, but she still can't wrap her head around why he would do it, leaving her standing there in total silence. The tension at the table breaks for a second when Serena pulls Joanna close, leading the girl to quietly thank her while Kelvin watches the two of them. But Serena can tell something is still wrong, so she looks Joanna in the eye and asks if she's really all right. Joanna hesitates for a moment, her hand clutching her dress so tight her knuckles turn white as she starts to sweat, her expression becoming dead serious as she realizes she can't keep this a secret anymore. She finally finds her voice and tells everyone at the table that there's something really important they need to know. The news hits like a ton of bricks, and Serena's face turns cold as she repeats the word poison back to her. She thinks about Paulo, the doctor they all trusted, while her anger boils over so much that she drops everything. She looks completely terrifying with her eyes glowing in the dark, wondering what on earth those people were thinking trying to hurt her son. Kelvin immediately tries to step in and tells her she needs to calm down, but Serena just snaps back, asking how she could possibly stay calm after finding out someone is trying to kill her kid. Joanna looks over at Vincent with a really worried expression. She's just thinking about him and how he's holding up, but he beats her to it by asking if she's doing okay herself. She's a bit caught off guard, but Vincent just sits back and tries to stay calm, telling her that it's fine and that he was honestly just a little bit startled by the whole thing. Serena looks down while holding onto the evidence, telling him it's completely normal to be upset since nobody expects to be poisoned by a doctor they actually trusted. The anger finally hits a boiling point and Serena tries to storm out, telling Kelvin to let her go. She's completely lost it, yelling that she won't be satisfied until she's cut Paulo into pieces while the kids watch in total shock. Kelvin manages to grab her and tells her to put the sword away for now, and even though she's still fuming, he looks her in the eye and tells her to just leave the rest to him. Serena finally takes a breath and agrees to let Kelvin take charge of the situation. Kelvin immediately calls out for his butler, Danny, who's already standing by and ready to help. The order is simple. Kelvin wants every single pill and bottle of medicine Paulo ever brought into the house. Danny gives a quick nod and says he's on it, heading out to round up the evidence while the rest of them sit back down at the table, the air feeling heavy as they wait for the butler to get back. Serena picks up her tea and tries to smile, telling Joanna she's sorry for scaring her with that earlier blow-up. It doesn't take long before Danny returns to the dining room and apologizes for the wait, and he hands over a small glass bottle filled with dark pills, confirming this is the stuff the doctor was providing. Joanna looks the pills over with her special skill as Kelvin asks her what the final verdict is. Kelvin lays it out straight, saying every one of them is pure poison, leaving Joanna to just sit there and process the news. Kelvin clenches his gloved hands together on the table. The tension is thick as he says Paulo is up to something bad. Serena starts thinking back to when the doctor first showed up. He used to come by once a month to check on Vincent, and she mentions he actually arrived a year ago with a solid recommendation from the royal palace itself. The plan was to keep Vincent stable until they could find a real cure, which is why the doctor prescribed those specific pills. They were supposed to keep him from getting any weaker, but Serena looks down, feeling completely betrayed. She really trusted Paulo, especially since Vincent's condition actually seemed to get better for a little while. She just stares at her tea, unable to believe someone would pull something like this right under their noses. Kelvin cuts through the silence and tells everyone that, no matter what happens next, they have to keep this a secret. He looks incredibly serious, set on handling this quietly and carefully. Serena speaks up and tells the family that she actually knows a very reliable apothecary who can help. She thinks they should take a chance and leave Vincent's health in this person's hands for now. In the next scene, a new guy shows up at the estate and says it's an honor to meet everyone. He looks pretty friendly as he explains that he came as soon as he got the request from Sir Kelvin, and he introduces himself to the family, saying his name is Dino and he's a professional pharmacist. Dino gets straight to work checking the medicine and says he's figured it out. It's a poison made from animal organs. He brings the small pill up to his face to get a better smell of the ingredients. Dino says there is absolutely no mistake because that specific scent is still lingering in the room. Vincent looks pretty worn out as he agrees that the air definitely has that weird smell to it. So Dino just gives a confident little smile like he's already got a plan to handle the situation. Dino opens up his medical kit and tells everyone to just relax and rest assured. He admits that while this Venerana stuff is definitely harmful if someone takes it regularly, the thing is, it's actually famous for being a slow-acting poison. Since people have known about this specific poison for a really long time, it turns out that a reliable method for cleaning it out of the body is already well established. Dino's hands start to glow as he gets ready to perform some magic right there. He officially activates his pharmacraft skill with a confident look on his face. Magical energy and medicinal petals start to swirl around as he creates the cure, so he hands over the new medicine and says that if Vincent keeps taking it, the poison will be neutralized in a few weeks. Dino finishes up by letting Vincent know that in most cases, there won't even be any lasting side effects to worry about. Dino sees the concern on their faces and offers to test the medicine on himself first if they're still worried about it. Serena quickly tells him that it's totally fine and there's no need for him to go that far, so Vincent looks over at him and mentions how Dino is a pharmacist that his father really trusts. Dino explains that to be more specific, it was actually his own grandfather who owed their family a huge favor. He goes on to say he was really shocked when Lord Kelvin's messenger just showed up out of nowhere at his grandfather's house, pointing out that it's been so many years since they last had contact, and yet he's just really honored that the family actually remembered him and reached out for help. As the sun shines over the mansion, Dino expresses how truly grateful he is for the chance to be there, but even with his gratitude, there's still a bit of a serious mood in the room, because he admits that he was actually pretty surprised once he saw the state of things for himself. Vincent sits quietly on the edge of the bed with his shirt open, letting Dino examine the dark marks on his skin. Dino mentions how he has treated tons of people in his career as a doctor, but he admits he has never seen symptoms quite like this before. Vincent just looks down, looking pretty tired of hearing how unusual his case is. Dino takes a closer look at the arm, noting that it looks like a massive black bruise, though it's more like the skin itself has just changed color. It's not just the color though, there are these weird scale-like things growing over the skin in different spots, making the whole area feel totally numb. Dino asks if it's true that moving around causes a sharp pain to shoot through the left side of his body. Dino sits across from him and asks if all these symptoms have been there ever since he got that snake bite. Vincent looks back at him and confirms that's exactly right, and that it's been this way for 2 years now. Dino gets a serious look on his face, saying he has never once heard of any kind of snake venom that could cause a reaction as strange as this one. Vincent stays silent while the doctor processes everything, leading to Dino finally being honest and saying he isn't sure if he can actually help with a case this far gone. Dino isn't giving up though. He tells Vincent he's going to personally look into a way to fix this, even if it's something he's never seen before. Vincent looks a bit relieved and gives him a sincere thanks for not just walking away from the case. Right as they're finishing up, Vincent realizes something and says he just remembered a question. He asks Dino if the medicine he gave him earlier is going to end up making him feel all sleepy or out of it. Dino explains it was just a basic antidote, so there's nothing to worry about in terms of side effects. He tells Vincent that if the stuff he was taking before was meant to help him get his strength back, he's got a better plan. Vincent listens closely as Dino explains how he can actually whip up a custom batch of medicine himself, as long as he has permission, and he promises this version won't make him drowsy at all. Later on at dinner, Vincent mentions the idea to the whole family and says he'll talk to his father to get the green light for the new meds. Dino just smiles, happy to see things finally moving in the right direction. Kelvin makes a big announcement at the table, saying he's decided to have Dino stay at the mansion until spring, which Dino is totally down for, telling Joanna he's looking forward to working with her again. Kelvin starts looking back on the past, mentioning how almost 20 years ago, he was actually really close with Dino's grandfather. Since the old man was originally from the kingdom of Khalid, Kelvin was hoping to find out more about a rare plant called dispal grass, so he brought Dino in thinking the guy might have some secret info on it. Dino gets a bit serious and explains that his grandfather actually passed away a few years back, but he's here to take his place after inheriting the family's apothecary shop and all their medical gear. He's honest about his skills though, admitting he doesn't have all the answers just yet, especially when it comes to the specifics of that dispel grass Kelvin was asking about. Dino mentions that luckily, he heard his grandfather spent years traveling sketching plants and researching all kinds of medicine and materials across the country. He explains that even though the old man is gone, he left behind all his journals from those trips. Dino rests his hand on the records, saying he wants to stay at the mansion while he looks through them for clues. Kelvin looks at him seriously and says he's counting on him to find what they need. But that's not the only reason he's staying. Kelvin adds that on top of being Vincent's doctor, he wants Dino to help out with mixing all the medicine the people in the territory need during the winter. Dino doesn't mind the extra work, especially since his home is in the neighboring kingdom of Nixarba, which apparently gets completely buried under deep snow during this season. He admits he can't really go anywhere in that weather anyway, so staying at the estate is perfect. Joanna thinks about how things are working out, realizing this whole situation is actually a pretty good opportunity, while Dino gives her a friendly smile, saying that even though it's just for a little bit, he's happy to be working with them. Later on, Joanna walks through the bright hallway clutching a book to her chest, looking up at the windows when she spots Dino way up on a ladder. He calls out a morning greeting, which totally catches her off guard. She stops to look up at him, asking what he's doing up there so early, and Dino looks back to explain he's just getting the new apothecary room organized since they were nice enough to set it up. He starts climbing down, mentioning that the space they gave him is actually way bigger than he expected. Glancing at the book in her hands, he asks if she's planning on spending another day studying in the library. Joanna tells him that's the plan, and Dino can't help but mention how hard she's been working lately. So, she starts heading off, calling back that she'll just see him later when everyone meets up for dinner. Joanna thinks about how things are changing starting right now, and she tells Dino she's heading off to the library to get some research done. She starts planning out her busy schedule, like having lunch with Lord Vincent, and then heading straight into her etiquette lessons with Lady Serena in the afternoon. It's actually pretty fun for her, but there's still one thing: her stomach just ties itself in knots thinking about meeting the Crown Prince. Even so, she looks at how hard Kelvin, Serena, and Vincent are working, and she knows she has to step up and work just as hard as them. Moving on, the day the Crown Prince is supposed to visit finally arrives. Joanna stands there looking amazing in her new dress, ready for the meeting. Everyone around her can't stop saying how beautiful she looks, and Serena tells Joanna that the new outfit suits her perfectly, making Joanna blush as she thanks them for the kind words. Even though everyone is throwing compliments her way, the maids keep telling her how great she looks while she just stares at her reflection, feeling totally flustered. She thinks about how dressing up like this is actually super embarrassing, but it's time to focus because they need to go over the plan one more time. The whole family stands ready in the hall since the person visiting the estate today is the current king's legitimate son. And finally, the first prince, Cedric, makes his appearance looking every bit like royalty. The family discussion continues about the royal line, starting with the third prince, Lord Tristan, who was born to the queen. He stands out among the siblings, but then there is also the second prince, Lord Clifford, who was born to a consort, creating a pretty messy situation since there's a troublesome factional dispute happening within the royal family right now. Kelvin warns Joanna that it might be for the best if she just avoids bringing up that whole topic entirely. Changing the subject, Serena mentions that Prince Cedric, the first prince who's visiting today, has actually been on really good terms with Vincent for a long time. And Kelvin adds that they even think of the prince as their own son, but he's cut off by a loud noise, speaking of the guy right as things start moving outside. Kelvin looks over toward the carriage and wonders out loud if Cedric has finally made his big arrival. Cedric steps out of the carriage with his guard and greets Kelvin, saying it's been a while, and Kelvin walks up to meet him, telling Cedric he's glad he finally made it to the estate. The prince then turns his attention over to Joanna, who's standing nearby waiting to be introduced. So Cedric keeps it casual and tells her he's just a close friend of Vincent's. He reaches out his hand and says it's a real pleasure to meet her. But then he notices she might be a little nervous, so he explains he's only there for a friendly visit and tells her she shouldn't be so tense, asking her to just act like herself while he's around. Moving inside, the group settles onto the couches in the lounge where Cedric mentions that he and Vincent go way back to their days at the academy together, which is why he ends up visiting the Linhan house pretty often, leaving Joanna looking a bit surprised. Cedric kicks back on the sofa with some tea, mentioning how he heard Vincent was basically like a son to Kelvin, but then he adds that he's actually the one managing the neighboring Mehal estate these days. Joanna watches him and can't help but think about how he's totally making himself at home, acting like he owns the whole place. Cedric just keeps snacking with a big smile while his guard stands behind him, looking a bit stiff and clearing his throat to get things back on track, which is when Kelvin speaks up to ask how Vincent has been doing lately. Serena answers for him, explaining that ever since Joanna showed up, Vincent has been eating way more than usual and honestly seems like he's actually starting to enjoy himself. Joanna just nods along, but on the inside, she's wondering if the house is always this chill and relaxed, especially with the prince around, who just smiles and says he's really glad to hear his friend is doing better. Kelvin looks over at him and says his name, getting ready to bring something else up. Kelvin leans in close to Cedric, his expression getting a bit more serious as he mentions he has some news specifically about Paolo, the physician who was supposed to be looking after Vincent. Since the room is full of people, Kelvin keeps it low and suggests that the two of them should probably catch up in private later to discuss the details, and Cedric just nods and says that's fine, though the shift in the mood is pretty obvious to everyone sitting there. He doesn't want to dwell on the heavy stuff too long though, so he tells the group they really need to pick up the pace because his schedule is packed. He's actually planning to head back to the royal capital first thing tomorrow morning, so there really isn't a whole lot of time left for them to just sit around and chat casually like this. He turns his attention directly to Joanna with a big smile and asks if they can finally start talking about her rare skill, and Joanna just stares back at him, clearly feeling the pressure of being put on the spot by royalty. Cedric doesn't waste another second and tells his guard, Conrad, to get everything ready, and the guard just gives a quick professional answer. Joanna watches closely as Conrad reaches into his gear. She recognizes exactly what he's pulling out, and it's definitely not a normal item. Joanna's eyes go wide when she sees what Conrad is holding. It's a rare magic bag, and Cedric watches closely while Conrad pulls out the contents, thinking about how he's heard plenty of rumors about this gear, but this is actually his first time seeing the setup in person. He's clearly just as curious as everyone else. So he explains that the device they're looking at is a specialized magic tool typically kept under wraps at the royal palace, or used at the borders whenever they need to do a deep dive into someone's status and skills. He looks Joanna right in the eyes and tells her that since they're all on the same team now to help Vincent recover, the most important thing they need to figure out is the truth behind her unique skill. So he asks if she's okay with him confirming the details right there in front of them. Without waiting around, he says they should get started with the measurement, and Joanna takes the crystal in her hands, looking pretty nervous about what's about to happen next. Cedric sits back on the sofa and waits. Everyone is quiet while the magic tool does its thing. Joanna stares into the crystal, and her eyes reflect the glowing light as the data starts to flow. A status window pops up in midair, but it's a total mess of glitched text and impossible numbers. Cedric looks at the display and lets out a laugh, saying he's actually pretty surprised by what he's seeing. He mentions that he had heard some rumors in the letter sent to him, but it turns out these kinds of strange, new skills really are popping up all over the world lately. He tells the group that he even did his homework by checking the secret records at the royal palace, and he specifically looked into the status Joanna was given during her ceremony when she was 15. He confirms that back then, her only listed ability was just login bonus and nothing else, so he asks if she really used items called skill candy to boost her powers, and Joanna tells him yes. Joanna's father stands there holding a document as someone nearby addresses Cedric as Your Highness. The father hands over a paper and says he put together a summary of everything, and Cedric takes it while saying thanks. They all sit together on the couch while Cedric starts looking through the papers. His eyes stay focused on the page as he reads about Joanna's weird powers. He flips the page and says he gets it, sounding like he's finally making sense of the situation. Even though he mentions that there were a bunch of words he didn't really know, he tells the group that he's got the general idea of how her skill functions. He looks over and calls out Joanna's name to get her attention. He asks her if she would be willing to pull up that special login bonus screen for him right there, and Joanna quickly says yes. Joanna explains to everyone that she's the only one who can actually see or touch the interface, pointing out exactly where the screen is floating right in front of her. She uses her hands to show them that it's about a certain size, adding that it looks pretty much like that clear plate the magic tool made before. Cedric calls for Conrad, who then asks if he can try touching the screen for a second, and Joanna tells him to go for it. She guides him, telling him the screen is right around that area as he reaches out. Conrad moves his hand through the air but says he doesn't feel like he's touching anything, noting that from his position, there's absolutely nothing there. Meanwhile, Joanna sees his hand passing right through the middle of the digital display. Cedric gets all excited and wonders what'll happen if he tries it too, which makes Conrad yell at him to behave. Cedric keeps things chill, telling Conrad it's fine since they already made sure nothing here was dangerous. Then he leans in with a huge grin and asks Joanna if she'll show him how the gacha works next. The room stays pretty lively while Cedric laughs, saying the whole situation is just totally amazing. He can't believe a bottle really just appeared out of thin air right in front of them, while he asks if this is the holy water she just pulled from the system, and Joanna tells him it is. She explains to the group that she's finally figured out how she can manually pull items out of the digital interface and bring them into the real world, though she adds that once something is out, she doesn't think there's a way to put it back. Cedric immediately asks if she can take out the dispel grass next, but Joanna starts to hesitate, explaining that she's never actually touched that one because she's worried about what the effects might be. Serena mentions that the grass usually vanishes only a few days after being picked, but Cedric just smiles and tells her not to even worry about that problem. He points out that besides fitting anything regardless of size, Conrad's magic bag is special because it completely stops time for anything stored inside of it. Joanna says she understands and tells everyone she's going to pull the item out now. There's a sudden flash of light that catches everyone off guard for a second. Joanna stares at the leaves in her hands, realizing she's finally holding the dispel grass. The system shows it's a rare herb that usually goes bad after just 3 days. A really powerful aroma starts coming off the plant and filling up the room, and Cedric leans in to check it out, noting that it definitely has a strange scent. Joanna mentions they should move on to the beginner potion next, but Kelvin stops the demonstration for a second and calls out to Serena. He says he wants to talk with the two of them alone, and Serena says she understands. She tells Joanna to head out with her while Kelvin dismisses Conrad. The two men are left alone in the room to have a serious talk about everything they just saw. Kelvin admits it was all way beyond his expectation. Cedric stares at the grass, repeating the names of the gacha and exchange skills, thinking about how intense it is that Joanna can get whatever she wants, just by saving up coins. Kelvin sets his tea down, sensing what his friend is thinking and makes it clear right away that he isn't giving her up. Kelvin takes a slow sip of his tea, looking completely calm and confident, as Cedric mentions that Joanna is the fiancé of his close friend and benefactor Vincent. Cedric quickly adds that he wouldn't dream of messing with her, especially since Kelvin is actually terrifying despite his gentle look. Even with his blue hair and blue eyes, there's a much darker side to his reputation. In the kingdom next door, everyone knows him as the Blue Devil. He only stays a count because he doesn't have any interest in chasing more power, but between his sword skills and his leadership, he could easily bring the whole capital to its knees. Moving on, Cedric looks closely at the dispel grass and thinks about how hard it is to find stuff like this. Noting that the grass and holy water are so rare, he can't even imagine the price they'd go for. He just sits there holding the plant, wondering how much longer Kelvin can keep Joanna's power a secret. Kelvin makes it clear that he has no intention of selling the rare items for a quick profit, so he's having Joanna keep them in her item box for the time being. Cedric mentions that there's a limit to how much she can actually store, so this whole setup is probably just a temporary fix for their problem. Still, Cedric admits it's a wise decision to keep things quiet because, if rare items like those hit the market, they'd stand out way too much, and there's no telling what might happen if the people in the Second Prince's faction found out about it. He explains that even if Clifford himself isn't trying to cause trouble, there are a lot of bad rumors going around about his fiancé's family, the House of Marquis Malthus. Looking at Kelvin, Cedric says he thinks this path is the best way to keep Joanna safe. Cedric watches Kelvin and realizes that the guy is way more intense than he looks. Knowing that Kelvin won't ever back down or hesitate to take a stand, even if he has to go up against the entire state itself. He knows for a fact that the Earl wouldn't show a single bit of mercy if anything bad ever happened to Joanna. Cedric just smiles, thinking to himself that Kelvin is definitely the one person in this world he'd never want as an enemy. So, he tells Kelvin that he'll handle things on his end by having a private talk with his father, the king. Kelvin looks back at him and asks what they're supposed to do about the follow-up report for the Research Institute. But then he suggests that maybe Cedric could just hold off on sending that in for a little while. He mentions that he'd really appreciate it if they could just keep things under wraps for the time being. As they sit there together, Kelvin tells Cedric to make sure he keeps reporting back if anything unusual starts happening. Cedric listens and asks where they go from here. Cedric looks pretty serious as he mentions he needs to talk about Paolo, so Kelvin sits there with his tea and asks if something went wrong lately. He starts talking about the specific medicine Vincent has been taking, which was apparently just prescribed by Paolo the other day. Kelvin explains that Joanna actually used her appraisal skill on the pills and turned out they were a slow-acting poison, which leaves Cedric totally speechless. Kelvin just stares back with a cold, focused look in his eyes. Cedric holds the bottle, looking worried, and asks if they're positive about this. Kelvin lets him know that Vincent is seeing a new doctor now, and the good news is that the poison doesn't seem to be leaving any lasting damage. Kelvin looks relieved that the poison didn't do permanent damage, but he still apologizes to Cedric for everything. And he even admits that he actually suspected Cedric was behind it for a second, though he realizes now he was totally wrong. Cedric takes it seriously and says he's going to investigate things much deeper from his side of things. So, Kelvin tells the guy he's counting on him to find the truth. He just sits there thinking, trying to figure out who would actually want to do something like this. In the next scene, Cedric heads over to the bedroom and calls out for Vincent with a big smile, walking right up to the bed to ask how he's been doing since it's been such a long time. Vincent looks pretty calm and just says he hasn't really changed much lately, but he notices something off and asks Cedric if he's actually lost a bit of weight. Cedric just turns back and asks if he really thinks so. Vincent starts to say something but trails off as he looks at his friend. Cedric just laughs it off and tells him that his whole vibe seems a lot different than before. Vincent admits that since he sees Joanna every single day now, he felt like he really needed to start putting more effort into his appearance. The mood shifts when Cedric mentions he heard the full story from Paolo, and he clenches his hands together and tells Vincent he's sorry for everything that happened. But then he suddenly switches gears and tells Vincent to give him a break, leaving the guy pretty confused while Cedric explains that the new teacher already gave him an antidote. He says the teacher promised he'd be totally fine if he just keeps taking it for a bit, and then he leans in to ask if Vincent has actually seen Joanna's special skill in action yet. Vincent mentions that he actually saw her skill earlier, and explains how he was surprised since she literally pulled items out of thin air. He talks about how interesting the whole thing is and admits that lately he really looks forward to doing gacha with her every single day. Cedric just smiles and asks if he's bragging about his love life now. The mood shifts a bit when Vincent gets serious and calls out to Cedric, looking at his friend and thanking him for the chance to meet Joanna. Vincent says he's just so happy right now, but then his tone changes as he mentions that if anything should ever happen to him, he wants Cedric to promise he'll protect her so she can be happy. Cedric looks pretty worried and just says Vincent's name, sensing where this is going, but Vincent keeps going, explaining how he never wants Joanna to be used or hurt by anyone ever again. He starts to say that he needs something from his friend, but Cedric cuts him off and tells him to stop talking like that, right as Vincent was about to finish his request, and Cedric looks like he's about to lose it, telling Vincent that he's the one who's supposed to be making her happy. Vincent just looks away, focused on the idea of Joanna finally getting to live the life she actually wants. So he looks Cedric right in the eye and tells him he's counting on him to make that happen. Cedric stands there totally shocked by what he's hearing, but after a long silence he finally gives in and says he understands. Later on, the visit is over and Cedric is getting ready to head out, thanking the whole family for everything, while also apologizing for the trip being so short and hectic for everyone involved. The visit finally wraps up, and Joanna tells the prince and his guard to have a safe trip back home, but before he leaves, Cedric turns back and calls out her name to get her attention. He looks her right in the eyes and asks her to take good care of Vincent for him, giving her a really kind, genuine smile as he says it. Joanna is clearly moved by the request and just smiles back at him, and then the whole family stands there watching as the carriage finally pulls away. Everything goes back to normal at the estate, with flowers drifting past the windows, until Joanna and Vincent find themselves alone together sharing a quiet meal. She can't stop thinking about what Cedric told her earlier about looking after his friend, which makes her face turn totally red while she tries to focus on her food. Joanna is still totally lost in her head when Vincent suddenly calls out her name. She snaps out of it and apologizes for zoning out, so Vincent asks if something is actually bothering her. Corina the maid chimes in while blushing, admitting she was also caught up in her own thoughts, and Vincent catches on, asking if she's specifically thinking about meeting Prince Cedric. He points out that it was her first time meeting the guy, and then while they sit by the window, he asks Joanna how the meeting went. She admits she was a total nervous wreck, explaining that even though Serena taught her all the proper etiquette, she still feels like she can't ever get the hang of it properly. Vincent listens as she worries about her mistakes, so she quickly tells him that the prince and his men definitely didn't seem to mind at all. Vincent just gives a small, gentle smile like he's glad she feels better. Vincent mentions how glad he is to see that both of them are doing well, which makes Joanna ask if he means both the prince and his guard. Vincent explains that Cedric and Conrad were actually his close friends back in the academy. He tells her they used to spar constantly in sword class, and she finally gets why he acts so casual with the prince. Even Conrad used to comment on how close they were, while Vincent smiles, remembering how they used to bet their lunches on who would win their matches. He sits there for a second just thinking about how nostalgic those old days feel, But Joanna looks at him and realizes it must be a total nightmare for him to not be able to even hold a sword. So she quietly hopes they can find some kind of cure for his condition as soon as possible. Just then, a maid shows up to the room and tells Master Vincent that Lord Dino has finally arrived. So Joanna stands up and says she'll get out of their way and head out for now. Dino takes a close look at the bottle sitting on the table and mentions how beautiful it looks, while Vincent just casually agrees with him. Dino notes that it's supposedly called holy water, realizing this is exactly what he's heard rumors about, so he asks Joanna if he can borrow it for a moment, which caught her off guard. Vincent starts blushing a bit and explains that the bottle is actually a super precious gift from Joanna, so Dino looks over at her. And that's when Vincent asks if she can spare a bit for the doctor to check out. Joanna says she gets it and hands the bottle over to him right then and there. Dino is pretty impressed as he takes it, giving her a big thanks for letting him have a look at something so rare. He holds it up to his eyes to inspect it closely, and he can tell right away that this stuff is the real deal. Everyone is gathered around the table as Kelvin asks Dino what's going on, and Dino explains that seeing the holy water they mentioned earlier triggered a memory, so he places his hand on a worn-out book, saying the liquid reminded him of something very specific. It's a journal that belonged to his father. Kelvin and Serena listen closely as Kelvin opens the book and starts reading, noting that the journal describes an old legend that has been passed down through the years in a small, remote mountain village located deep within the kingdom of Khalid. The story begins a long time ago with a young woman living in that village. She had a lover she cared about more than anything, and the two of them were head over heels for each other, planning to spend the rest of their lives together. But the story takes a dark turn when another guy falls for her too, watching the couple from the shadows because he's obsessed and wants her all to himself. So, this guy goes and makes a dark deal to put a curse on her. It works, and before long, the girl just closes her eyes like she fell into a deep sleep that she was never going to wake up from. As time goes on, her body starts getting pale and faint, like she's just fading away. Her lover is desperate to save her, so he listens to the village fortune teller, who tells him to go on a quest for a special spring at the end of a rainbow. He spends days and days out there on the road, just pushing through the heat and the wind, never stopping even when it starts pouring. The man keeps walking after the massive storm finally dies down, heading straight out under a clear, sunny sky. Pretty soon, he spots a small rainbow in the distance, and when he finds the spring glowing with all those rainbow colors, he grabs some of the water. He doesn't waste any time and rushes back to the village, so he can give the girl that shimmering water to drink. It actually works, and the girl finally opens her eyes, leading to the two of them staying together forever after that. Serena adds that the guy who put the curse on her ended up falling into a deep sleep himself, never waking up and eventually just vanishing for good. Dino looks over the text and points out that while the symptoms are a bit different, he is convinced the shining water mentioned in the old story is actually holy water. And just then Joanna realizes that if Vincent drinks this, he might finally be okay. Kelvin looks serious and asks if Dino is saying there's a real chance of a cure, and Dino tells him straight up that he believes there is a possibility. But he stops for a second and says there's more to it, explaining that since there's no record of this ever being done, he can't give them a guarantee. His appraisal skill shows it isn't poison and won't have side effects, yet the uncertainty still hangs over them, leaving the family at a massive turning point where one choice changes everything for good. The room goes quiet as everyone waits for an answer, finally asking Vincent what he plans to do, and as the question hangs in the air, Vincent looks down and starts to give his response, saying that he wants to give it a try. He stands in front of the group and makes his choice clear, explaining that if there's even a tiny bit of hope for a cure, he has to take it. Then he turns to look at Joanna with a really calm, steady gaze. He speaks directly to her, calling out her name to get her attention while they sit together, and Joanna looks up at him with her eyes watering, asking if he wants a bottle of the holy water. She doesn't hesitate for a second, pulling it out and telling him here it is, so Vincent reaches out and takes the small bottle from her hand, thanking her for the help. He gives her a soft smile, reassuring her that everything is going to be just fine. Vincent doesn't waste any time and starts drinking the holy water. He tips the glass back and finishes every last drop in one go. He lowers the empty glass and just stands there for a second, waiting to see what happens. But then he looks over at Serena and admits that nothing is actually happening. He mentions that it didn't really taste like anything unusual, and tells everyone that as far as he can tell, holy water is just regular water. The group stays quiet for a moment before Joanna is asked if she feels any different, but Vincent speaks up first, saying it doesn't seem like a single thing has changed. He looks pretty relaxed about it and even gives a tiny, gentle smile, while Joanna just stares at him, trying to see if there's any tiny bit of progress. Joanna lies in bed, staring blankly as she thinks about how things are staying exactly the same, She can't stop picturing the dark marks on Vincent's body and wondering what happens if his illness never improves. The thought of him actually disappearing for good starts to weigh on her. She looks down, lost in her own head while she processes the reality of the situation. Later that evening, she's back in Vincent's room while he sits up in bed, and she tries to keep things light, leaning in with a smile to ask what they should talk about today. She even shows off her outfit, asking if he likes the clothes she's wearing because in her head, there are so many things she wants to share and tell him. Suddenly, she has a moment of clarity and whispers that she finally understands, curling up in bed later that night while she starts to admit how she really feels. Joanna holds the small glass bottle of medicine tight in her hand. She looks at it while laying in bed, finally coming clean with herself and admitting she's actually in love with Vincent. Over in Vincent's room, someone keeps a close watch while he sleeps. It's Dino, who sits back in a chair with his book and says he's going to get some rest, explaining that he's just staying there for the day to make sure everything stays safe. The room goes quiet as a tired voice whispers out a good night, but Vincent's mind isn't empty, and he tells someone to wait as he drifts off. Suddenly, he's standing in the middle of a total white void, looking around and wondering what this place is. It's bright and feels warm, like he's stepped into somewhere completely different. He starts to move through the light until he hears a voice calling out for Master Vincent. Someone walks across the polished floor and calls out Joanna's name, guiding a young man along and telling Lord Vincent to follow them this way. It's a memory of a guy with light hair and long earrings who looks pretty serious. The scene shifts to the mansion covered in a layer of fresh white snow, and inside the bedroom, a voice breaks the silence by saying good morning, as the maid looks over at Joanna to start the day. She tells Joanna that she just got an update on Lord Vincent's condition from Danny, explaining that he actually wants to speak with everyone directly to go over the details. Joanna's eyes light up and she says they need to hurry and get ready right now, while over in the other room, his parents sit by his side as someone calls out his name. Serena dabs her eyes with a handkerchief, clearly moved as she stands by Vincent.